On a Sunday morning, I stood in the kitchen doorway, sweat still drying after my run, and asked my wife, "When is the baby's baptism?" She didn't even look at me. Yesterday, something inside me froze. 6 weeks of planning, and I was the only one left out. That night, as I walked past the hallway, I heard her voice behind a half-closed door. "All we need is to prove he's incompetent. The rest will be easy." And in that moment, I understood. This was never an accident. I'm grateful you're here for this one. Before we dive in, drop a quick comment and tell me in just one word, how are you feeling right now? I read every single one, and your thoughts matter more than you know. A quick note. Some details in this story have been shaped for reflection and clarity. What matters most is the lesson at its heart. When I asked my wife when our grandson's baptism would be, she looked up from her phone and said one word: yesterday. I stood in the kitchen doorway at 06:30 on a Sunday morning in November, still cooling down from my run. At 58, I still rose at 0600 every morning, a habit carved by 20 years in Army logistics that no amount of civilian life could erase. The question had been casual. I'd been planning to check my calendar, make sure I didn't schedule a consulting call that weekend, maybe coordinate with my son about carpooling to the church. Corinne Garrett, 54, sat at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone with the practiced calm of someone who coordinated St. Mark's charity events for a living. She didn't look up when she answered. Her voice had the same tone she used when telling me we were out of coffee. "Yesterday," she repeated as if I hadn't heard. "It was yesterday." I stood perfectly still. 20 years of handling logistics under mortar fire teaches you to control the visible signs of shock. My heart rate stayed even. My breathing didn't change. But something inside my chest went very cold and very quiet. "You knew for how long?" I asked. She set her phone down and met my eyes for the first time. 6 weeks. Stellan told me 6 weeks ago. Stellan Garrett, 30, was our son. The father of the grandson whose baptism had happened yesterday without me. "And you didn't think to mention it." It wasn't a question. Corinne heard it anyway. "I thought you knew," she said. The lie was clean and smooth, delivered with the same efficiency she used for donor thank you notes. "Stellan said he'd told you." I turned and walked to the bedroom, before she could see my hands curl into fists. Military discipline kept my stride measured, my shoulders level, my face blank. But inside, I was doing the math that logistics taught me to do automatically. 6 weeks of planning, a baptism required coordinating a church, a priest, godparents, family travel, catering for the gathering afterward. You don't organize that in an afternoon. You plan it the way you plan a supply convoy. Timelines, confirmations, contingency schedules. 6 weeks meant Corinne had known since the first week of October. 6 weeks meant every morning she'd sat across from me at breakfast, she'd known. Every evening when I'd asked how her day went, she'd known. Every time I'd mentioned wanting to see my grandson, she'd known I wouldn't be at his baptism. The exclusion wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate. I sat on the edge of our bed and opened my phone with hands that were absolutely steady. 20 years of handling weapons under stress taught you that much. My son's social media page loaded in 3 seconds. The photos had been posted 11 hours ago. 1900 hours yesterday evening, right after the ceremony and the gathering that followed. The first image showed the baptism itself. White gown, holy water priest, making the sign of the cross over an infant I'd held exactly twice since his birth, 4 months ago. My grandson. Stellan holding him with the apologetic posture of a man who'd learned to avoid confrontation at all costs. Stellan's wife beside him, smiling. I scrolled. More photos. The gathering at Stellan's house in Myers Park. Extended family I recognized. Neighbors from our street, Corinne's charity committee friends, everyone dressed in Sunday clothes, holding champagne flutes, smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Blessed morning with the newest member of our family. #baptism, #family, #grateful." 43 comments. All congratulations. All warmth. Not one person had written sorry. Desmond couldn't make it. Not one person had asked where the grandfather was, because they already knew I wasn't invited. 20 years in logistics taught me to read schedules like heartbeats. 6 weeks of planning doesn't vanish by accident. This many people don't coordinate around an absence unless the absence is part of the plan. I kept scrolling. Corinne appeared in the next photo, standing in the center of a family group shot in Stellan's living room. She wore the navy dress she'd bought last month, the one she'd said was for a charity luncheon. Her smile was warm and maternal. Her hand rested on the shoulder of a man I'd never seen before. He was 56, maybe older, with silver hair and an expensive suit. He stood beside my wife with the easy smile of a man accustomed to donor galas and community trust. His posture was comfortable, familiar, the stance of someone who belonged in that living room, in that family photo at that baptism. I zoomed in on his face, handsome in the way men with money and good tailors manage to be, confident, relaxed. I didn't recognize him. 32 years of marriage. I knew Corinne's college friends, her charity committee, her book club, her yoga instructor, her hairdresser. I knew the faces of every person she'd ever introduced me to at a fundraiser or a neighborhood barbecue. This man was a stranger, but he stood exactly where a husband should stand. I scrolled to the comments. Beautiful ceremony, Corinne, so glad we could all be there. Your grandson is blessed to have such a loving family. What a special day, congratulations. No one mentioned me. No one asked why the grandfather wasn't in the photos. I went back to the family photo and studied the silver-haired man's face again. His hand wasn't touching Corinne, but it rested on the back of the sofa just behind her, the territorial gesture of someone marking space. His smile reached his eyes. He looked like a man who belonged there. I sat on the edge of the bed holding my phone, looking at a photo of my wife standing beside a stranger at my grandson's baptism, surrounded by family and friends who had all known I wouldn't be there. The man standing next to my wife in the family photo smiled like a host welcoming guests to his own home. Silver hair, expensive suit, comfortable posture. I'd never seen him before in 32 years of marriage, but he stood exactly where a husband should stand. I spent the rest of the morning identifying the silver-haired man. Reverse image search, LinkedIn Charity Foundation websites. His name was Leland Mercer, 56 years old, director of a community wellness foundation, board member at 3 nonprofits Corinne volunteered with. He'd been in my house before, probably multiple times at fundraisers I'd attended, without ever noticing him standing too close to my wife. That afternoon, Corinne brought me tea I hadn't asked for. She set the cup on the side table next to my chair in the living room with the careful precision of someone performing a gesture they'd rehearsed. Earl Grey, 2 sugars, the way I'd taken it for 30 years. Her hands were steady. I wanted to talk, she said, settling into the chair across from me. I'm worried about you. I looked at her over the rim of the cup I hadn't touched. Worried about what? You've been so different lately. Her voice had that same practiced calm from the kitchen that morning. Smooth, scripted, distant. I just want to make sure you're okay. Different how? I set the tea down untouched. I'm the same man I was last week. That's what worries me. She leaned forward slightly, hands folded in her lap, like she was addressing a donor committee. You don't seem to notice when things change, when people are trying to reach out to you. The phrasing was strange, formal. Not the way Corinne spoke when she was annoyed with me for leaving dishes in the sink or forgetting to return a phone call. This was different, deliberate. People, I repeated. You mean Stellan? I mean everyone who cares about you. She used the word cares the way someone uses a term from a manual. We're all worried. We just want everything to be peaceful. There it was again. That word. Peaceful. The way she emphasized it like it meant something specific, something more than calm or quiet. Do you understand? She asked. I looked at my wife of 32 years, sitting across from me in our living room, asking if I understood why she was worried about me being different, using words like peaceful and reach out and cares, with the cadence of someone reading from a script. I didn't know which word in that sentence was true. I understand, I said. She smiled, relief or something that looked like it. Good. I'm glad we can talk about this. Communication is so important. Communication, another manual word. She stood smoothing her skirt with both hands. I just want you to know I'm here. We're all here. If you need anything, I'll keep that in mind. She left the tea on the table. I watched it go cold while I sat in the chair, replaying every word she'd used. Worried, different, peaceful, understand, communication. Each one chosen carefully, deliberately, like coordinates on a map I wasn't supposed to see. By 2300 hours, I was alone in the annex room. It wasn't an office. Corinne called it the annex because office sounded too formal for a 10 by 12 space off the garage that I'd claimed when we moved into this house 18 years ago. One desk, one lamp, one filing cabinet, a window that looked out at the backyard. No decorations except a field map from Kandahar I'd framed because it reminded me that chaos could be organized if you documented it correctly. I opened a new notebook. Black cover college-ruled pages, the kind I'd used for operational logs in the Army. The first page was blank. I wrote the date, November 6th, 2025, day 1. Then I wrote everything. 6:30 hours. Asked C about baptism date. Response, yesterday. Confirmed she knew for 6 weeks. Deliberate exclusion. 700 hours social media review. Baptism photos show full family gathering. No mention of my absence. Attendees already informed I would not be present. 0710 hours. Identified unknown male in family photo standing beside C. Name Leland Mercer, age 56. Director Community Wellness Foundation. Board member 3 nonprofits, where C volunteers. Positioning in photo territorial familiar host-like. 1,400 hours. C initiates conversation, brings tea unasked. Uses phrase worried about you 3 times. Additional keywords different. Peaceful. Understand? Communication. Phrasing formal scripted. Not natural speech pattern. I stopped writing and read what I'd documented. 4 entries. 12 hours of my life reduced to tactical observations and timestamps. It looked like the operations logs I'd written in supply depots from Germany to Iraq, the same format I'd used to track convoy movements and equipment failures and personnel issues that needed immediate attention. 20 years writing operational reports taught me one thing. The battle starts the moment you document the first move. I added one more entry. 2,300 hours. Initial assessment. C. Executing prepared plan. Timeline unknown. Leland Mercer involvement confirmed by photo positioning. Purpose unclear. Wellness keywords suggest narrative construction, establishing perception of subject's declining capacity or altered state. Objective document. All interactions. Maintain timestamps. Preserve evidence. Identify plan before execution completes. I looked at the words I'd written. Subject. That's what I'd called myself. The same term I'd used in incident reports when a soldier was under investigation or a contractor was being evaluated for security clearance. I was treating myself like a logistics problem that needed solving. Maybe that was the only way to solve it. I turned to a new page and wrote one more line. Assessment. 21 days minimum before next escalation. Standard timeline for medical evaluation requests. Legal consultations or guardianship petitions. Sufficient preparation window if no day is wasted. I closed the notebook and sat in the lamplight, looking at the black cover. 32 years of marriage. 1 grandson I'd held twice. 1 baptism I'd missed because my wife had decided 6 weeks ago I shouldn't be there. 1 silver-haired man standing beside her, like he belonged in my family. And now 1 notebook documenting the first day of whatever she was planning. I looked at the final line I'd written. Assessment 21 days minimum, before next escalation. Sufficient time if no day is wasted. The same calculus I'd used planning supply routes under fire. This time the enemy slept 10 feet away in our bedroom. I slept in the annex that night. Told Corinne I had consulting work that would run late, that I didn't want to wake her. She didn't ask questions. By 0600 the next morning, I'd added 3 more pages to the log. The next morning, my wife made breakfast as if yesterday hadn't happened. She stood at the stove at 700 hours spatula in hand, making scrambled eggs the way she'd made them for 32 years. 2 eggs for her, 3 for me butter, not oil pepper, but no salt because of my blood pressure. The coffee was already brewed. 2 mugs on the counter, steam rising in the morning light through the kitchen window. I was thinking, she said without turning around. Her voice had that same careful calm from yesterday's tea conversation. Maybe you could talk to someone. I poured coffee into my mug and waited. Just for an assessment. She continued sliding eggs onto plates with practiced efficiency. For peace of mind. There are consultants who specialize in this kind of thing. This kind of thing, I repeated. Wellness evaluations. She set my plate in front of me and sat down across the table with hers. It's very common, nothing to be concerned about. Just someone who could provide an objective perspective. Objective, wellness, assessment. The same scripted vocabulary from yesterday deployed with the precision of someone who'd memorized talking points. I don't need an assessment, I said. I'm fine. She took a small bite of eggs and chewed slowly, her expression perfectly composed. Of course, as you wish. I just thought it might help. Help with what? With everything, she gestured vaguely with her fork. The stress, the isolation, you know. I didn't know. But I nodded and ate my eggs and watched her watch me, and I understood that this conversation was a test I'd just failed by refusing. She finished breakfast in 12 minutes, washed her plate dried, put it in the cabinet, checked her phone twice, then excused herself with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I need to make a quick call, she said. Charity committee business. She walked out the back door into the yard. I stood at the kitchen sink and watched through the window. She stood with her back to the window, talking to someone. Not about me, about the plan. Her free hand moved while she talked, gesturing the way she did when she was explaining something complicated to someone who wasn't understanding fast enough. Twice she shook her head. Once she pressed her palm flat against her forehead in a gesture I recognized as frustration. The call lasted 4 minutes. When she came back inside, her smile was back in place. All set, she said brightly, just coordinating the holiday toy drive. It was November 7th. The holiday toy drive didn't start until December. I nodded and said nothing, and added it to the list of things I'd logged that afternoon. By 1400 hours, I was back in the annex with the door closed. I pulled up our family calendar on my phone. The shared calendar Corinne maintained for household scheduling, the one she updated with doctor appointments and charity events and family gatherings. The one I checked maybe twice a month, because my consulting schedule didn't overlap much with her volunteer work. I scrolled back to October. October 1st, 1400 hours. Calendar entry. Baptism. St. Augustine, 11 a.m. November 6th. RSVP confirmed. I opened the RSVP details. Garrett family 4 attending. Corinne Stellan's wife Desmond. Dietary restrictions none. She'd RSVP'd for me, put my name on the attendance list, confirmed I'd be there. 5 weeks before the baptism happened. 5 weeks before she told me it had already passed. I set the phone down and opened my laptop. Our joint checking account. The one we'd maintained since 1993. The one where both our names appeared on every statement, the one Corinne managed because I traveled too much in the early years to track household expenses. I scrolled through 3 months of transactions. September 14th, consulting fee, $800. October 9th, consulting fee, $800. November 3rd, consulting fee, $800. No vendor name, no receipt attachment, just consulting fee, and an account number I didn't recognize. I cross-referenced the dates with her calendar. None of them corresponded to charity events or committee meetings. No pattern I could identify. Just 3 identical payments, 1 month apart, totaling $2,400 for consulting services I'd never authorized and couldn't identify. I opened a new page in my log and documented everything. Day 2, 700 hours. C proposes wellness evaluation at breakfast. Uses terms assessment, objective perspective, common procedure. I decline. She accepts without argument, but body language indicates displeasure. 7:15 hours. C makes phone call outside. Duration 4 minutes. Claims charity committee. Business toy drive. Toy drive not scheduled until December. Likely reporting my refusal to unknown contact. 1400 hours. Family calendar review. October 1st entry shows baptism, RSVP confirmed for Garrett family 4, including my name. C had included me in official attendance count 5 weeks before ceremony, excluded me from actual event. Deliberate construction, not oversight. 1430 hours bank statement review. 3 payments labeled consulting fee. $800 each September to November. Total $2,400. No vendor identification. No receipts. Unknown recipient. I stopped writing and read what I'd documented. How many mornings had she sat across from me, already knowing what she was about to do? 6 weeks between the RSVP and the baptism. 6 weeks of shared breakfasts and evening news and goodnight kisses. 6 weeks where she could have mentioned the ceremony, asked if I wanted to attend coordinated schedules, the way we'd coordinated everything else for 3 decades. 6 weeks of choosing silence. I looked at the calendar entry again. October 1st, the day she'd confirmed I'd attend. The same week she'd made the first consulting fee payment. $800 to someone whose name didn't appear anywhere in our records. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. This wasn't about forgetting to tell me. This wasn't about miscommunication or scheduling conflicts or the kind of normal household chaos that happened in any marriage. I stared at the October 1st calendar entry. 6 weeks between her RSVP and the baptism. 6 weeks she could have asked if I wanted to attend my own grandson's ceremony. 6 weeks of deliberate silence. This wasn't neglect. This was construction. I spent the rest of day 2 documenting everything in the log. By midnight, I had 8 pages cataloging deception that required weeks of coordinated planning. Construction, I'd called it. That's what it was. Systematic, deliberate, built one lie at a time. My son arrived on the 3rd evening without calling first. The doorbell rang at 1900 hours. I was in the kitchen finishing dinner when I heard Corinne open the front door. "Stellan," she said. Her voice carried that same practiced warmth she used for charity donors. "What a nice surprise. Come in." I walked into the living room. Stellan stood in the entryway in his work clothes, tie-loosened briefcase still in hand. He looked tired. 30 years old and already developing the permanent tension lines around his eyes that came from working 60-hour weeks at a consulting firm. "Hey, Dad," he said, not smiling but not hostile either, just careful. "Stellan?" I nodded. "Didn't know you were coming by." "Spur of the moment," he said, but Corinne didn't look surprised. She settled into her usual chair with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd been expecting this exact visit at this exact time. "Coffee," she offered. "No thanks." Stellan set his briefcase by the door and sat on the sofa across from my chair. "I can't stay long, just wanted to check in." We made small talk for exactly 3 minutes. Weather, his commute, a project at work, the kind of surface conversation we'd perfected over the years, the safe territory, where we didn't have to discuss why he hadn't told me about the baptism, or why his mother had excluded me from my own grandson's ceremony. Then he leaned forward, his posture changed, shoulders squared, hands clasped between his knees, the body language of someone preparing to deliver a difficult message. "Dad needs help," he said. Not, "Dad, do you need help?" Not, "I'm worried about you, can we talk?" Just a flat declarative statement, like he was reading from a script he'd been given. "I can see it," he continued. "Mom can see it. We're all worried." I watched Corinne behind Stellan's shoulder. She nodded once, a small approving gesture. My son couldn't see it from where he sat, but I could. She was marking his performance, confirming he'd delivered the right line. "Help with what exactly?" I asked. Stellan blinked. The question had thrown him off script. "With everything," he said. "You've been different, withdrawn. Mom says you won't even consider talking to someone." My son looked at me with genuinely worried eyes. But that sentence wasn't his. I'd heard him use those exact words before. Not about me. About his friend in college who'd had a breakdown junior year. "Won't even consider talking to someone." That was the phrase the campus counselor had used. The phrase Stellan had repeated when he'd told me the story. He was recycling language someone had fed him. Probably his mother. Probably in multiple conversations over multiple days, until it sounded natural enough to deliver to my face. "I appreciate your concern," I said. Kept my voice level. Didn't let him see what I was seeing. "But I'm fine. Nothing's changed." "That's the problem," Corinne said quietly. "You can't see it yourself." Stellan nodded. "Exactly. That's what Mom said. That's why it's important to get an outside perspective." I looked at my son, looked at my wife, looked at the scene they'd staged in my own living room with Stellan as the concerned child, and Corinne as the protective mother, and me as the unstable man who couldn't recognize his own decline. "I'll think about it," I said. Stellan stayed another 10 minutes, made more small talk, asked about my consulting work, mentioned his son learning to crawl. Normal conversation, normal tone, like he hadn't just delivered a rehearsed intervention at his mother's direction. When he left, Corinne walked him to the door. I heard her whisper something I couldn't make out. Heard him respond, "I tried." I sat in the living room for 20 minutes after he left, not moving, documenting every word in my mind so I could transfer it to the log later. The next evening I learned what they were really after. I was walking through the hallway toward the kitchen at 2000 hours when I heard Corinne's voice through the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, maybe 6 inches enough to let sound carry, but not enough to see inside. Her voice was low, urgent. The careful calm she used in public was gone. "That key is the problem," she said. "He keeps everything locked down." I stopped walking, stood perfectly still in the hallway back against the wall where she couldn't see me if she looked through the gap. "He certainly won't share it voluntarily," she continued. "Not now, not after everything." A pause. She was listening to whoever was on the other end. "We need to do it another way," she said. "The evaluation is step 1. Once we establish he can't manage his own affairs, we can petition for full financial guardianship. That gives us legal authority to access everything." Another pause, longer this time. "Yes," she said, "including the Bitcoin accounts. He thinks keeping them in his name only protects him. But if I have guardianship, I can force disclosure. The court will require it for asset protection. The key. She said the key. Not money, not accounts. The key. I'd bought Bitcoin in 2013 when it was worth almost nothing. Held it through every crash and rally. Watched it grow from a curiosity to a legitimate asset. The current value was close to $280,000. I'd never added Corinne's name to the wallet accounts. Kept the private keys in my own secure storage. Told myself it was about protecting family assets from potential creditors. If her volunteer work ever created liability exposure, now I understood why she'd never asked about it. She'd been planning how to take it. The attorney said 3 weeks minimum, she said. If the evaluation shows incapacity, we file immediately. Leland's already agreed to testify about behavioral concerns. With his professional credibility and Stellan backing the wellness narrative, we'll have everything we need. I stood in that hallway for 10 minutes after her call ended. She didn't want me in a nursing home. She didn't want me under medical supervision for my own good. She wanted control of my accounts so she could force me to surrender access to assets she couldn't touch any other way. I didn't sleep that night. Sat in the annex until 400 hours, documenting the phone call I'd overheard, writing every word she'd said about guardianship and forced disclosure, and using my own son as a witness to my supposed incapacity. By dawn, I had 12 pages of evidence and a clear understanding of what she was building. A legal case to take control of assets she couldn't access any other way. The morning she said vulnerable adult protocol at the breakfast table, I knew someone had trained her. Day 5. Kitchen, 700 hours. Same routine. Coffee already brewed, eggs already scrambled. Corinne sitting across from me with that practiced calm she'd perfected over the past week. I've been thinking more about what we discussed, she said. I really think a risk assessment would give us both peace of mind. Risk assessment, not doctor's appointment, not checkup. Risk assessment. The specific term used by Adult Protective Services when evaluating whether someone poses a danger to themselves or others. Risk assessment, I repeated. That's not a phrase you've ever used before. She stirred her coffee with the small silver spoon she'd inherited from her mother. It's what the consultant recommended, just a standard evaluation to establish a baseline. What consultant? The one I spoke with last week. She said it like it was obvious, like I should have known she'd been consulting with professionals about my mental state without telling me. They suggested we should consider safety planning for vulnerable adult protocols. It's standard. Vulnerable adult protocols. I set my coffee cup down carefully, kept my hands steady even though something cold was spreading through my chest. I'd spent 20 years writing military operational reports. Read federal acquisition regulations, contract compliance documents, legal briefings on personnel issues, and medical evaluations. I knew institutional language when I heard it. The specific terminology government agencies and social service organizations used to create official documentation that would hold up in court proceedings. Risk assessment, safety planning, vulnerable adult protocols, baseline evaluation. Those weren't phrases a worried spouse picked up from casual internet research or concerned friends. Those were technical terms from Adult Protective Services guidelines, elder care legal frameworks, guardianship petition standards. Someone had taught her those words. Someone who understood how to build a case that would look legitimate to a judge reviewing guardianship applications. Who trained you? I asked. She blinked. Trained me? Those aren't your words, Corinne. You've never talked like that in 32 years. Who gave you that script? Her face remained perfectly calm. I don't know what you mean. I'm just trying to help. She stood, cleared her plate, washed it in the sink with methodical precision. When she turned back, her expression was concerned. Maternal. Like she was looking at someone who couldn't understand basic conversation. This is exactly what I'm worried about, she said softly. You're seeing things that aren't there. She left the kitchen. I heard her bedroom door close. I sat at that table for 20 minutes, looking at my half-finished coffee, thinking about institutional terminology and coached responses, and a wife who'd learned to speak like a social worker, preparing evidence for court. Who taught her those words? The answer was somewhere in those consulting fees. Somewhere in the phone calls she made when she thought I wasn't listening. Somewhere in the systematic planning that had started long before she told me the baptism had happened yesterday. I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything in the log. By noon, I had 15 pages and a growing sense that I was still several steps behind her timeline. The afternoon of day 5, I went for a walk. I needed to get out of the house, needed air, needed to move. I took my usual route through the neighborhood, past the houses I'd walked past for 7 years since we'd moved to this street. Winifred Irwin, 67 and still sharp as the library cataloging system she'd retired from, stopped me on the sidewalk with genuine concern in her eyes. "Desmond," she said. Not a greeting, a statement, like she'd been waiting for me. "Winifred," I nodded. "How are you? I need to tell you something." She glanced back at her house, then at mine 3 doors down. "Your wife has been talking about you in the neighborhood group." I stopped walking. "What has she been saying?" "That you have a problem." Winifred folded her arms across her chest. She was a small woman, barely 5'3", but she had the presence of someone who'd spent 40 years enforcing library silence rules on unruly teenagers. "That you're acting unstable. That she's worried about your safety. That you refuse help." "When did she start saying this?" 3 weeks ago, maybe longer." Winifred's expression was carefully neutral. "She mentioned it at the church women's group. Again at the neighborhood association meeting last week. She's been very consistent in her concerns." 3 weeks, before the baptism, before she'd told me it happened yesterday. She'd been building the narrative while I still thought we were living a normal marriage. "What do you think?" I asked. Winifred looked at me for a long moment. The kind of assessing look librarians develop after decades of spotting plagiarism and overdue excuses, and students claiming they never received the late notice. "I've known you 7 years," she said finally. "I've never seen what she's describing. You've always been punctual, courteous, reliable. You still maintain your property. You still walk at the same time every morning. You still wave hello and ask about my garden." She paused. "Unstable people don't maintain routines like that," she said. "They don't remember that my roses have aphids or that my grandson just started college. Whatever your wife is saying, I don't see it." Something loosened in my chest. Not relief exactly, but recognition that I wasn't completely alone in seeing through what Corinne was constructing. "Thank you for telling me," I said. Winifred nodded once. "I thought you should know what's being said, and what some of us don't believe." She walked back to her house. I stood on that sidewalk after she left, realizing 2 things at once. First, Corinne had already started the community campaign I was just discovering. Second, the first person to question her narrative wasn't someone I'd cultivated, or convinced it was someone who'd simply been paying attention. Winifred's warning stayed with me through the rest of day 5 and into the night. 3 weeks. Corinne had been building the community narrative for 3 weeks while I'd been living in our house thinking everything was normal. But I had an ally now, someone who'd watched and questioned instead of accepting what she'd been told. I zoomed in on the baptism photo until the silver-haired man's face filled my screen. Day 6, 800 hours, annex room, coffee going cold on the desk beside my laptop, while I studied every pixel of the image I'd saved from my son's social media page. I already knew his name. Leland Mercer. I'd identified him on day 1 through basic reverse image search and LinkedIn profile review. 56 years old, silver hair, expensive suit, standing beside my wife at my grandson's baptism like he belonged there. But I hadn't dug deeper, hadn't understood what he represented beyond being the man in the photo. Now I needed to know why Corinne had chosen him. I opened his professional biography on the Coastal Carolina Community Foundation website. Leland Mercer, Executive Director. 15 years in philanthropic leadership, major donor coordination, grant oversight, board development, community partnership initiatives, annual gala planning, strategic vision implementation, the kind of prestigious non-profit position that came with social capital, the kind of role where your word carried weight in churches and country clubs and charity committees. I scrolled through his public appearances, ribbon cuttings, foundation announcements, donor recognition events. Every photo showed the same confident smile, the same expensive suits, the same comfortable presence among Charlotte's philanthropic community. Then I found a gallery from St. Mark's annual charity auction 18 months ago, October 2024. I'd attended because Corinne had coordinated the event and needed me there for the couple's sponsorship photo. I'd spent most of the evening making small talk with other reluctant spouses while Corinne worked the room with her committee. There he was in photo number 43. Leland Mercer shaking hands with the church pastor. Leland Mercer presenting a foundation check. Leland Mercer standing in a group shot that included Corinne and 5 other committee members. I enlarged that group photo. Corinne stood 3 people away from him. Professional distance, committee colleague spacing. Nothing that would suggest anything beyond volunteer coordination. But I remembered that night now. Remembered Corinne introducing me to someone. "This is Leland Mercer from the Community Foundation. Leland, my husband." Polite handshake. Small talk about foundation grants and church partnerships. Maybe 90 seconds of conversation before someone else needed Corinne's attention, and we'd moved on. I'd forgotten him completely by the time we drove home that night. That was 18 months ago. Somewhere between then and now, he'd moved from committee colleague to the man standing beside her at family events. "I've met this man," I said aloud to the empty annex. "Charity auction St. Mark's last year. He's not a stranger. That's the problem." Corinne hadn't chosen some anonymous affair partner. She'd chosen someone the community already knew, already trusted, already respected. Someone with professional credibility and social standing. Someone whose word would carry weight if questions were ever raised about my competence or stability. "She chose someone the community already trusts," I said. "Smart." I added it to the log. Day 6, 0800 hours, Leland Mercer identified as Coastal Carolina Community Foundation Executive Director. Professional relationship established 18 months prior at St. Mark's charity auction. Social credibility significant. Community standing provides protective narrative shield. Then I pulled 3 months of bank statements from our joint account and spread them across the desk. I'd already identified the consulting fee payments. Now I needed to see what else was hiding in the routine charges we'd both ignored because we'd trusted each other with shared finances for 3 decades. It took 4 hours to find the pattern. Thursday, September 12th. Upstream Restaurant, Charlotte, Uptown. Dinner for 2. $187. I checked my calendar. September 12th was a Thursday. I'd had a VA appointment that afternoon. Didn't get home until 1900 hours. Thursday, September 12th, Upstream Restaurant, $187. I was at VA that day. Saturday, October 4th, Comfort Inn, Union County, overnight stay, $139. October 4th was the weekend I'd driven to Raleigh to visit Bernard, an Army buddy who'd moved there after retirement. I'd stayed overnight at his house. Corinne had said she had a charity committee planning session that Saturday and preferred to stay home. October 4th, Comfort Inn, Union County. I was in Raleigh visiting Bernard. Friday, October 18th, Blumenthal Performing Arts Center. 2 tickets to Charlotte Symphony, $160. I remembered that night. Corinne had mentioned the symphony performance weeks in advance, said she wanted to go. Then 2 days before the show, she'd told me it had been canceled due to conductor illness. I'd believed her without checking. October 18th, symphony tickets, event not canceled. I was told it was canceled. I photographed each statement with my phone, highlighted every charge, cross-referenced every date with my calendar, with my emails, with my own receipts from those days proving I was somewhere else. Upscale restaurants on evenings I had appointments. Hotel stays when I traveled. Concert tickets when I was told events were canceled. A pattern so clear it would hold up in any courtroom, documented in black and white on bank statements we both had legal access to. Every charge had an alibi. Every alibi I could prove. I sat back in my chair at 2200 hours on day 7, looking at the evidence spread across my desk like a tactical map. 32 years of marriage, 3 months of documented adultery, 1 community foundation director with social credibility, 1 wellness narrative building for 3 weeks, 1 guardianship plan targeting assets she couldn't access voluntarily. 20 years writing after-action reports taught me one thing: rage is useless without documentation. I felt both. The rage was there, cold and controlled, sitting in my chest like a weight I'd learned to carry, without letting it show on my face. But the documentation was clean, systematic, irrefutable. I added 14 pages to the log that night. Dates, vendors, amounts, alibis, photographs. Every piece of evidence cross-referenced and verified. I looked at the 3-month timeline spread across my desk. Adultery. Bitcoin Wellness Campaign Community Foundation Director as accomplice. I had evidence of betrayal, but I didn't yet understand why she needed all these pieces moving at once. I spent the night trying to understand how the pieces connected. Adultery, Bitcoin, wellness narrative, community credibility. But the pattern wasn't complete yet. I was still missing something. The moment I saw 2 of Corinne's church friends at our door, I knew the visit wasn't spontaneous. Day 7, 1,400 hours. I was in the annex when the doorbell rang. Heard Corinne's voice from the entryway, warm and welcoming. "Janet Carroll, what a lovely surprise. Come in, come in." No surprise in her tone, just performance. The kind of practiced warmth she used when she'd been expecting someone. I walked into the living room as they settled onto the sofa. Janet Holbrook, 52, and perpetually cheerful from year, organizing St. Mark's volunteer programs, arrived with a casserole dish and practiced church lady concern. Carol Dunbar, 62, and chair of the church hospitality committee, followed Janet inside with a knowing nod of someone accustomed to pastoral visits. "Desmond," Janet said brightly, "we were just in the neighborhood and thought we'd drop by." Nobody in Charlotte drops by in the middle of a weekday afternoon without calling first. Not in this neighborhood, where everyone worked or volunteered or maintained schedules that required coordination. But I nodded and smiled. "Good to see you both." Corinne was already pouring coffee. Fresh pot, already brewed. 2 extra mugs already set out on the tray beside her usual service. She'd been expecting them. We made small talk for 20 minutes. St. Mark's upcoming Thanksgiving food drive, the weather turning cold earlier than usual this year, holiday plans for December, Janet's daughter's new job in Raleigh, Carol's book club selection, normal conversation, pleasant, casual, the kind of visiting that happened in living rooms across Charlotte every afternoon. Except Corinne kept glancing at me. Small looks. Concerned expressions that lasted just long enough for Janet and Carol to notice. I waited. 23 minutes into the visit, there was a natural pause in the conversation. Carol had just finished describing her grandson's piano recital. Janet was reaching for her coffee cup. Corinne was sitting with perfect posture in her chair, hands folded in her lap. I spoke calmly, conversationally, the same tone I'd use asking about dinner plans. "Corinne, I saw a charge from Upstream Restaurant on the 12th, I said. "That was the day I was at the VA. Were you there?" It was a reasonable question, a specific question, the kind of question couples ask each other about shared finances all the time. No accusation, no anger, just clarification about a charge on our joint account. Corinne didn't look at me. She turned to Janet and Carol instead. "He's been like this lately," she said. Her voice was soft, worried. The tone she used when discussing genuinely concerning situations with her charity committees. Going through every statement, questioning everything, every purchase, every receipt. "I'm worried about him." She'd been waiting for me to ask. This whole visit was the stage. Janet's cheerful expression shifted to concern. "Desmond, maybe you're just stressed? It's normal to feel overwhelmed sometimes." "I'm not stressed," I said, kept my voice level. "I just asked about a specific charge." "But why are you going through the statements at all?" Carol asked gently. "That seems like a lot of focus on small details." "Small details. A dinner charge that appeared on our account the same day I was 30 miles away at a VA appointment wasn't a small detail. It was evidence. But I couldn't say that. Not with Janet and Carol sitting on my sofa looking at me like I was someone who needed gentle handling. "I like to know where our money goes," I said. Corinne sighed. A small, sad sound. "That's what concerns me. He used to trust me with household finances. We've had a joint account for 32 years. But now he questions every transaction, examines every line item. It's not like him." Janet reached over and touched Corinne's hand. "That must be hard for you." "I just want him to be okay," Corinne said. "I've tried suggesting he talk to someone, get an assessment, just for peace of mind, but he won't consider it." Carol nodded. "Sometimes people who need help the most are the ones who resist it." I sat in my own living room, listening to my wife tell her church friends that I needed help because I'd asked about a restaurant charge. Watched them nod sympathetically. Saw them exchange the kind of knowing glances people share when they're witnessing someone who doesn't recognize their own problem. I couldn't defend myself without sounding defensive. Couldn't explain the evidence without sounding paranoid. Couldn't ask reasonable questions without proving her point that I was obsessed with small details. She'd turned my documentation into my symptom. "I appreciate your concern," I said. Stood up. "If you'll excuse me, I have some work to finish." I walked back to the annex and closed the door. I could hear their voices continue in the living room. Corinne's soft explanations, Janet's sympathetic responses, Carol's pastoral murmurs about prayer and support and being there for friends in difficult times. They stayed another 15 minutes. When they left, I watched through the annex window as Corinne walked them to their car. Saw her accept their hugs. Saw Carol squeeze her shoulder in the universal gesture of, "We're here for you." Saw Janet look back at the house with concern. Concern for Corinne, not for me. I understand. I'm not allowed to be right in front of outsiders. That evening, I added 6 more pages to the log. Day 7, 1400 hours. See stages visit from Janet Holbrook and Carol Dunbar. St. Mark's Volunteers. Fresh coffee already prepared before doorbell rang, indicating prearranged timing. 23 minutes of normal conversation before I asked specific question about upstream restaurant charge from September 12th date I was at VA appointment. C did not answer question. Instead turned to guests, stated I have been questioning everything and going through every statement, framing evidence documentation as symptom of mental obsession. Witnesses responded with sympathy for C, suggestion I am stressed and need help. Public gaslighting successful. Reasonable inquiry weaponized into proof of instability before witnesses. Assessment. Cannot present evidence in front of third parties without confirming C's narrative. Any question equals paranoia. Any documentation equals obsession. Strategy requires professional evaluation outside her influence network. I watched Janet and Carol leave with backward glances of sympathy for Corinne, not for me. She'd turned my evidence into my illness in under 60 seconds. Any question I asked from now on would sound like paranoia to anyone who witnessed it. After Janet and Carol left, I understood I couldn't fight Corinne's narrative alone. Every question I asked would be twisted into evidence of instability. Every piece of documentation would become proof of obsession. I needed someone who could see the evidence objectively without her influence. I called the elder law attorney at 700, had an appointment by 900, and sat across from Quentin Thornton by 1000. His office occupied the 14th floor of an uptown Charlotte building with windows overlooking Trade Street. Oak furniture, law degree from Wake Forest, framed certifications in elder law and fiduciary litigation, professional photographs of what looked like successful case resolutions. Quentin Thornton, 47, reviewed my handwritten logs with the quiet intensity of an attorney who'd seen too many elders lose their autonomy to well-crafted lies. I spread 21 days of documentation across his desk. 26 pages, handwritten, chronological. Every entry time-stamped. Every conversation quoted with exact phrasing. Every bank transaction cross-referenced with calendar events and alibis. He read in complete silence. 10 minutes, maybe longer. Turned each page methodically. Made occasional notes on a legal pad with a fountain pen. Didn't ask questions, didn't interrupt, just read. I sat perfectly still and let him work. Finally, he looked up. This is the best file I've received from someone without legal training, he said. You wrote operational reports. 20 years, I said. Army logistics, same discipline. He nodded slowly, tapping his pen against the legal pad. Your wife is building a guardianship case. The wellness evaluation she keeps proposing, that's step 1. If she can get a doctor to sign an incapacity certification, she files a petition with the court. With guardianship, she gains legal control of all your financial decisions, including cryptocurrency accounts. That's what I thought. But you've documented everything. He gestured at the pages spread across his desk. Timestamps, exact quotes, cross-referenced evidence. This is prosecution quality work. For the first time in 8 days, someone looked at my evidence and saw preparation instead of paranoia. What's the strategy? I asked. Don't confront her directly, he said. Not yet. She's building a narrative. Let her continue. But we need 3 things. First, keep documenting exactly like this. Second, get your own psychiatric evaluation from a doctor outside her network. We need official certification that you're completely competent. Third, identify independent witnesses who can testify to your stability. I have a neighbor, I said. Winifred Irwin. She already questioned Corinne's story. Good. Anyone else? Veterans I served with. We meet for coffee every week. Quentin made a note. Perfect. Military witnesses carry significant weight in court, especially if they can testify to long-term observation of your behavior and decision-making capacity. He opened a file drawer and pulled out a retainer agreement. I'm taking your case, he said. We'll build a counterfile. When she files for guardianship, and she will be ready with documentation she can't refute. I signed the retainer, paid the initial fee, left his office at 11:30 hours with the first strategic advantage I'd had in 8 days. Someone with professional training believed me. That afternoon, I went to Common Grounds Coffee House for the weekly Thursday veteran meeting. Bernard Cobb, 61, and still built like the supply sergeant he'd been at Fort Bragg, sat at our usual corner table. Ulysses Hampton, 63, and still carrying himself like the combat engineer colonel, he'd been joined us with 2 cups already in hand. We'd been meeting here every Thursday for 6 years. Same table, same time. Same comfortable silence between conversations that didn't require constant talking. We spent 15 minutes on general topics. VA benefits changes. Weather. Bernard's grandson starting college. Ulysses' wife's book club drama. The kind of maintenance conversation that kept friendships running without demanding too much attention. Then I asked the question I'd been planning since I left Quentin's office. "Do I look unstable to you?" Bernard laughed, started to make a joke, then saw my face and stopped laughing. "Serious question," I said. Ulysses studied me across the table with the same assessing look he'd used evaluating officers under his command. Silent, methodical, taking inventory of everything from posture to eye contact to the steadiness of my hands around my coffee cup. "You look exactly like you did 20 years ago," he said finally. "Just older. Why?" "Someone's saying I'm not?" Bernard set his cup down. "Who?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. They'd known Corinne for years. Attended charity events with us. Met her at veteran family gatherings. They could do the math. "If there's something wrong," Ulysses said quietly. "Speak up. You shouldn't be asking us that question." There it was, the military code we all understood. You shouldn't be asking us that question. Meaning the answer is so obvious that asking it is unnecessary. Meaning we've been watching you for 6 years and you're the same person you've always been. Meaning if someone's questioning your stability, they're wrong, and we'll say so. It wasn't a promise. It was better than a promise. It was confirmation that they'd already made their assessment and reached their conclusion without being asked. 20 years out of uniform, and they still spoke the same language I did. Bernard leaned back in his chair. "What do you need?" "Nothing right now," I said. "Just wanted to know if I was seeing things clearly." "You are," Ulysses said, not reassurance, statement of fact. We finished our coffee, talked about next week's meeting, discussed whether to try the new barbecue place on South Boulevard for next month's lunch. Normal conversation. Normal rhythm. Nothing changed except I knew they'd testify if I needed them to. They didn't know it yet, but they'd already committed. I left that coffee shop knowing 2 things Bernard and Ulysses didn't yet know themselves. First, they'd already agreed to be witnesses without realizing it. Second, when the time came, they'd show up without hesitation, because that's what soldiers do. I didn't tell Bernard and Ulysses what I was facing. Didn't need to. They'd already given me what I needed confirmation that someone watching me objectively saw exactly what I knew to be true. I was the same person I'd always been. Whatever Corinne was building, it wasn't based on reality. On the 9th evening, my wife brought me papers that looked like health insurance forms. I was in the living room reading when she came in with a manila folder. Her expression was casual, domestic, the same face she wore when asking me to sign permission slips or warranty registrations or any of the 100 routine documents that accumulated in a marriage. "Just some health insurance updates," she said, setting the folder on the coffee table in front of me. "Needs your signature by Friday." I picked up the folder. "What's changing?" "Nothing major. Coverage adjustments, beneficiary confirmations, standard annual review." I opened the folder. 5 pages. Professional formatting. Insurance company letterhead. I recognized from our actual provider. Introductory paragraph about policy updates and regulatory compliance requirements. All the bureaucratic language that made most people's eyes glaze over. "I'll read it thoroughly first," I said. "Of course," she smiled. "Take your time." She left me alone in the living room. I read every word. Page 1, coverage summaries, deductible adjustments, copay updates. All legitimate insurance language. All consistent with the kind of annual changes health providers implemented every fall. Page 2, beneficiary designation confirmations. Corinne listed as primary, Stellan as secondary, standard structure we'd maintained for years. Page 3, paragraph 1, eligibility requirements for coverage. Continuation. Paragraph 2, provider network updates. Paragraph 3, prescription coverage modifications. Paragraph 4, small print embedded in the middle of routine insurance language. In cases where cognitive assessment is pending, professional evaluation, temporary financial management authorization may be granted to designated representative to ensure continuity of care and coverage payments during evaluation period. I read it 3 times. 20 years writing military reports taught me to recognize when critical information was buried in bureaucratic formatting. This wasn't insurance language. This was legal authorization disguised as policy update. If I signed this document, I'd be granting Corinne temporary financial management authority the moment any cognitive assessment was initiated. Not after a doctor determined I was incapacitated. Not after a court reviewed evidence. The moment an assessment was pending. Pending. Meaning the second she scheduled an evaluation, I'd already refused, she'd have legal access to manage my finances. I set the papers down on the coffee table. Didn't sign them, didn't confront her, didn't reveal I'd noticed the clause hidden in paragraph 4 of page 3. Just returned complete silence. Corinne came back into the living room 20 minutes later. All set, she asked. I need to review it more carefully, I said. My voice was neutral, mild, the same tone I'd use delaying any routine decision. I'll look at it tomorrow. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her eyes move to the unsigned papers on the table, then back to my face, trying to read whether I'd caught the hidden authorization or simply hadn't gotten around to signing yet. She couldn't tell. She doesn't know I read page 3. No rush, she said. Just by Friday. She left the folder on the coffee table. I left it there unsigned. The next morning at 0800 hours, I sat in the annex with 3 months of bank statements and the account routing numbers from those consulting fee transactions. Mercer Strategic Consulting, LLC. I'd seen the company name on the statements but hadn't traced it yet. Now I needed to know who was receiving money from our joint account for services I'd never authorized and didn't remember requesting. North Carolina Business Registry. Public records. Anyone could search. I typed the company name into the state database. Mercer Strategic Consulting, LLC. Registered October 2024. Principal Officer, Leland Mercer. Registered Agent Leland Mercer. Business address, P.O. Box in Union County. Registered 6 weeks ago. I cross-referenced the timeline. October 2024. LLC registration. 2 weeks later, first consulting fee payment from our joint account. 1 week after that, Corinne starts using wellness evaluation language. I open Leland's professional biography on the Coastal Carolina Community Foundation website again. Executive Director, Philanthropic Leadership, Major Donor Coordination. Then I search for his side business registration, Mercer Strategic Consulting, LLC. Services listed financial planning, estate consultation, asset management advisory. None of which we'd ever contracted for. None of which had produced any reports, recommendations, or documentation. Just 3 monthly payments, totaling $2,400, flowing from our joint account to a company Leland had created 6 weeks ago. Mercer Strategic Consulting, LLC, I said aloud to the empty annex. Principal Leland Mercer, registered 6 weeks ago. I photographed the business registry page, photographed the bank statements showing the payments, photographed Leland's foundation biography, showing his community credibility alongside his private consulting LLC. She's been paying him with our joint account, $2,400 for consulting that never happened. This wasn't just adultery funded with marital assets. This was systematic financial transfer to someone with direct profit motive in gaining control of accounts he couldn't otherwise access. Leland wasn't just Corinne's affair partner providing emotional support for a troubled marriage. He was her business partner in a conspiracy to access assets worth more than $250,000. He's not just her lover, I said. He's her business partner in this. This wasn't passion, this was accounting. I added 8 more pages to the log that morning. LLC registration dates, payment timeline, business registry documentation, cross-referenced with the baptism exclusion, the wellness language campaign, the hidden authorization clause in the insurance documents. Every piece connected. I looked at the timeline I'd documented at affair. Started approximately same time as LLC registration. Consulting fees began 2 weeks later. Wellness language campaign 1 week after that. This wasn't infidelity that led to financial scheme. This was financial conspiracy that used affair as cover. By day 10, I understood the full architecture of what Corinne and Leland were building. Financial conspiracy disguised as marital concern. LLC payments disguised as consulting fees. Affair disguised as community support. Every piece designed to look legitimate until you documented the timeline. When Winifred stopped me on the sidewalk a second time, I knew the narrative had spread beyond my control. She didn't wave from her garden this time. She walked directly across her lawn to intercept me as I returned from my afternoon walk. Her expression was grimmer than our first conversation. She spoke at the church council meeting yesterday, Winifred said without preamble. Said you have PTSD, that it's getting worse, that she's trying to help, but you refuse treatment. I stopped walking. I served in logistics for 20 years. I never saw combat. There is no PTSD. I know, Winifred said. That's what made me angry enough to tell you again. She's using your service against you, turning something honorable into evidence of instability. What exactly did she say? That you have unresolved trauma from military service. That you're showing increasing paranoia about finances, questioning her about ordinary purchases, going through bank statements obsessively. Winifred's voice was tight. Some people nodded, accepted it. Others asked why she'd never mentioned it before in 7 years of visible marriage. 7 years. That's how long we'd lived on this street. 7 years of neighborhood barbecues and church events and charity fundraisers where Corinne had never once mentioned concerns about my mental health. Until 6 weeks ago when she needed a narrative to explain why I might resist signing documents that gave her financial control. How many people believe her? I asked. Enough, Winifred said. Not everyone, but enough that it's spreading. Janet and Carol from your house last week, they're telling people you interrogated Corinne about restaurant charges in front of guests, making you sound aggressive, unstable. I nodded, documented it mentally for the log I'd write that evening. Thank you for telling me, I said. Winifred studied my face. You're handling this very calmly. 20 years in the military taught me not to react until I have all the information. Do you have all the information now? Most of it, I said. Enough to know what I'm dealing with. She nodded once and walked back to her house. The next morning, I made an appointment with a private psychiatric practice in South Charlotte. Days 11 and 12 blurred together in the systematic preparation Quentin Thornton had outlined. If Corinne was building a case that I needed guardianship due to mental incapacity, I needed official documentation proving the opposite. The evaluation took 2 hours. Cognitive function tests, mental status examination, trauma screening, memory evaluation, depression inventory, anxiety assessment. The psychiatrist was thorough, methodical, professional. When we finished, she reviewed her notes in silence for 5 minutes. Mr. Garrett, she said finally, your cognitive function tests well above average for your age. No indicators of PTSD, depression, or any clinical disorder. You're remarkably stable. I need this in writing, I said. Notarize, dated today. She didn't ask why, just printed the certificate on professional letterhead. Signed, it had it notarized by her office administrator, dated November 13th, 2025. I folded that certificate the same way I'd folded deployment orders 20 years ago. Precise creases, tucked into my breast pocket, a defensive weapon ready before the enemy knew I had it. That evening at 1800 hours, my son arrived at the gate. I was in the front yard when Stellan's car pulled up. Winifred was in her garden, visible through the low fence that separated our properties, watering late-season plants in the fading November light. Stellan got out of his car and walked to where I stood by the gate. Hey, Dad, he said, tired. Same tension lines around his eyes, same careful posture. Stellan, I nodded. We made small talk, weather getting colder, his commute, work project deadlines, 30 seconds of safe conversation. Then he shifted his weight, squared his shoulders, the same preparatory stance I'd seen before he delivered his scripted concern. Dad needs help, he said, not a question. Declarative statement. We all see it. Before I could respond, Winifred's voice cut across the fence. Stellan, she said, not loud, but firm. The librarian voice that had silenced generations of teenagers. Who taught you to say that? My son turned surprised to see her there. Have you said those exact words to anyone else? Winifred asked. She'd set down her watering can and moved to the fence. That specific phrase, Dad needs help. Have you repeated it? Stellan's face flushed red. Mom said... He stopped, started again. Stopped again. It's just true, isn't it? He said finally. But his voice had lost certainty. He was hearing himself, hearing how the phrase sounded coming out of his mouth, recognizing it as something he'd been given, not something he'd thought. Winifred's expression was kind but relentless. Your father has lived on this street for 7 years. I've watched him maintain the same routines, the same courtesy, the same reliability that entire time. If something changed recently, I'd notice. I notice everything. And I haven't noticed anything concerning about your father's behavior. She paused. But I have noticed you saying the exact same sentence your mother has been saying to other people, word for word. My son doesn't know what he's doing, but now someone knows. Stellan looked between us, confusion and shame visible in his posture, in the way his hands opened and closed at his sides, in the fact that he couldn't form a coherent response. I should go, he said. He walked back to his car without another word. Winifred watched him drive away, then turned to me. That wasn't his sentence, she said. That was hers. Stellan left without another word, confusion and shame visible in every step. Winifred watched him go, then turned to me. That wasn't his sentence. That was hers. She'd seen what I'd been documenting for 12 days. The difference was she could testify to it. After Stellan left that evening, I added Winifred's intervention to the log. Day 12, 1800 hours. Independent witness, Winifred Irwin, documented S's programmed phrase in real time challenged origin of statement. Before subject could deliver full script, S, unable to explain source, left without coherent response. W, willing to testify. On the 13th morning, my wife brought me documents, with a doctor's signature I'd never seen before. I was at the dining table with coffee and the newspaper when Corinne set a manila folder in front of me. Professional medical letterhead, official formatting, the kind of documentation that looked legitimate at first glance. Dr. Stiles recommended a comprehensive evaluation, she said. Her tone was concerned, caring, the voice of a spouse worried about a loved one's health. He's concerned. I opened the folder. Preliminary Cognitive Assessment. Raymond Stiles. MD. Dated November 10th, 2025, 3 days ago. I read the document methodically. Every paragraph, every sentence. Patient exhibits concerning behavioral changes, including increased vigilance regarding financial matters, questioning of routine expenditures, and reported withdrawal from social engagement. Based on reported symptoms, recommendation for comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation. Preliminary clinical impression suggests age-related cognitive concerns warranting further assessment. Based on reported symptoms, not based on examination, not based on observation, based on what someone had reported to this doctor. I've never met Dr. Stiles, I said, kept my voice neutral, conversational. When did he examine me? He reviewed your case based on what I told him, Corinne said. That's how preliminary assessments work. I described your symptoms. He provided professional guidance. A diagnosis without examination. A recommendation, she corrected, for evaluation. That's different. I set the document down. Didn't sign anything. Didn't acknowledge the recommendation. Just left it on the table between us. I'll think about it, I said. The same response I'd given to every request, every suggestion, every document she'd presented for 13 days. She watched my face for reaction. Got the same military poker face I'd maintained since this started. No anger, no fear, no indication whether I'd caught the procedural fraud or simply delayed another decision. Don't wait too long, she said quietly. Dr. Stiles said early intervention is important. She left me alone with the document. I photographed every page, added it to the growing file I'd assembled. Then I called Quentin Thornton's office and scheduled an emergency afternoon appointment. At 1400 hours, I sat across from my attorney with Dr. Stiles's preliminary assessment spread on the oak desk between us. Quentin read in silence. His expression shifted within 30 seconds, neutral to focused. The look of an attorney who just identified a critical error in opposing documentation. He looked up. A physician cannot provide preliminary diagnosis without examining the patient, he said. This violates federal medical practice standards and state licensing requirements. So this document is worthless. Worse than worthless? Quentin tapped the letterhead with his pen. It's evidence of medical fraud. Dr. Stiles signed a clinical impression based solely on your wife's secondhand testimony. No examination, no interview, no direct patient contact. That's a fundamental violation of medical ethics. He made notes on his legal pad. Here's what this tells us, he continued. Your wife has been shopping for a doctor willing to sign documents without proper procedures. She found one. Dr. Stiles either doesn't understand federal regulations or doesn't care. Either way, this document invalidates any guardianship petition built on it. What do I do with it? Nothing, Quentin said. Don't sign, don't acknowledge, don't confront. Let them use it. I leaned back in my chair. Let them use fraudulent medical documentation. Exactly. Quentin's expression was calm. Strategic. When they file for guardianship, and they'll submit this as evidence. They'll use it to trigger a mandatory wellness check. That's when we produce your legitimate psychiatric certification, dated 3 days after this document. That's when we expose the procedural violation. That's when we demonstrate systematic fraud. She'd found a doctor willing to sign without meeting me. That took planning. They're building a case on a rotten foundation, Quentin said, but they don't know it's rotten yet. The longer they build on it, the more catastrophic the collapse when we expose it. How long do we wait? Until they file. Until they commit to this fraudulent document in court proceedings. Then we dismantle everything at once. I thought about the timeline. 13 days since the baptism exclusion. 3 weeks of community campaign. 6 weeks of systematic planning before that. LLC registration. Consulting fees. Wellness language training. Hidden authorization clauses. Programmed witnesses. And now medical fraud. Every piece designed to look legitimate, until someone with professional training examined it carefully. What about Dr. Stiles? I asked. What happens to him? State medical board investigation, Quentin said. License suspension at minimum, possibly revocation, depending on how many times he's done this. That's not our concern right now. Our concern is protecting your autonomy and assets. He organized the documents into a file. Keep documenting, he said. Every interaction, every document, every witness to her narrative campaign. When this goes to court, we'll have a file that proves systematic conspiracy. They'll have a preliminary assessment from a doctor who never met you. In combat logistics, the best ambush uses the enemy's own supply line against them. One more thing, Quentin added. She's going to escalate. The preliminary assessment didn't get your signature. The hidden authorization clause didn't get signed. She's running out of time on whatever timeline she and Leland established. Expect her to trigger the wellness check within the next week, probably by claiming emergency circumstances or immediate danger. I'll be ready, I said. You already are, he said. You have legitimate psychiatric certification, independent witnesses, 14 days of documentation. When she triggers the check, you'll pass it. And then we'll have evidence she initiated a fraudulent investigation. I left Quentin's office, understanding the next phase required something I'd spent 20 years in the military learning tactical patience. Let them trigger the wellness check. Let them use the fraudulent document. Let them build their case on a foundation we could prove was rotten from the first signature. Tactical patience meant waiting for Corinne to commit her next move, using the fraudulent foundation Quentin had identified. I didn't have to wait long. By day 14, the witness-gathering campaign was already underway. 3 people called or texted me that week, asking questions that weren't really questions. Tuesday morning, old neighbor from the previous street we'd lived on casual greeting, followed by, how are you feeling these days? Everything okay? Wednesday afternoon, Corinne's book club friend text message asking if I'd like to join them for coffee sometime, just to catch up and make sure you're doing well. A Thursday evening, distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. Call that started with weather and shifted to, your health is good, no concerns. 3 contacts, 3 variations of the same probing pattern, all within 4 days. Friday morning at 1000 hours, Philip Radcliffe called. Philip Radcliffe, 62 and retired from Army Supply Corps at Fort Bragg, called with the blunt honesty of someone who'd spent 30 years cutting through military bureaucracy. Desmond, he said without preamble, someone contacted me 2 days ago, a stranger. Asked if I'd witnessed you acting strangely, showing aggression, seeming confused, wanted me to make a statement. I set down my coffee. What did you tell them? I told him to go to hell. Philip's voice was flat, matter of fact. You're the sanest man I served with. 20 years I knew you, never saw you confused about anything, except that one time Supply Command sent us left-handed wrenches by mistake. What's going on? Someone's building a case that I'm mentally incompetent, I said. Your wife. Yes? Silence on the line. Then do you need me to make a statement? The real kind. Eventually. Not yet, but I'm documenting everyone they contact. Can you give me details? Who called? What exactly did they say? Philip described the conversation. Unknown male caller. Professional tone. Asked specific questions about my behavior, mood, decision-making capacity. Offered to send forms for written testimony. Philip had refused and terminated the call. They're collecting witnesses, I said. They were collecting witnesses and leaving a trail. I added Philip's report to the log. Day 14, 1000 hours, Philip Radcliffe contacted by unknown male soliciting false testimony regarding mental instability. P refused reported contact to me. Evidence of coordinated witness manufacturing campaign. That afternoon at 1400 hours, the doorbell rang. 2 people stood on my porch with official badges. North Carolina Adult Protective Services. Nadine Weaver, 44, identified herself as a social worker with Adult Protective Services. and asked if she could come inside to discuss a concerning report. Marcus Finley, 38 and newer to Adult Protective Services, carried the assessment clipboard with practiced efficiency of someone still following protocol exactly. "Mr. Garrett," Nadine said. Her voice was professional, neutral. "We've received a report that you may be an at-risk adult, requiring immediate assessment. The allegations include mental instability, threatening behavior toward family members, and inability to care for yourself. We need to conduct a wellness assessment." This was the moment Quentin had planned for. Let them come with their report. Let them see how prepared I was. "Come in," I said. "I've been expecting you. Please sit." I led them to the living room. They settled on the sofa. Marcus opened his clipboard. Nadine pulled out a tablet. I reached into my breast pocket and removed the folded document I'd been carrying for 2 days. Unfolded it with the same precise movements I'd used unfolding deployment orders 20 years ago. Handed it to Nadine. "I knew this report would come," I said. "I was evaluated 10 days ago." Nadine read the certificate. Marcus leaned over to read with her. Professional psychiatric letterhead. Comprehensive evaluation dated November 13th, 2025. 2 hours of testing, cognitive function assessment, mental status examination, trauma screening, depression inventory. Findings: no cognitive decline, no clinical mental disorders, no indicators of PTSD, cognitive function testing well above average for age group. Patient demonstrates remarkable stability and clear decision-making capacity. Signed, notarized, dated. Nadine looked up. "This is dated 10 days ago. You scheduled this evaluation before our report was filed." "I scheduled it the day after my wife started telling people I needed a wellness evaluation," I said. "I wanted professional documentation of my actual mental state before anyone filed reports based on her claims." Marcus made notes on his clipboard. "Mr. Garrett," Nadine said carefully, "can you tell us about the allegations in the report we received? Threatening behavior toward family, inability to manage finances." "I haven't threatened anyone," I said. "I've asked my wife specific questions about unexplained charges on our joint bank account. I've documented those questions. I've maintained detailed logs of every interaction. Would you like to see them?" I gestured toward the annex. "I have 14 days of handwritten documentation. Timestamps, exact quotes, cross-referenced with bank statements, calendar entries, and witness observations. My attorney has reviewed everything." Nadine and Marcus exchanged glances. "You have an attorney?" Marcus asked. "Elder law specialist," I said. "I retained him 8 days ago when I realized my wife was building a guardianship case. He's advised me to cooperate fully with any official investigations while maintaining documentation of all proceedings." Nadine set the psychiatric certificate on the coffee table between us. "Mr. Garrett," she said, "this is unusual. Most at-risk adult cases involve subjects who aren't aware they need help. You're, very prepared." 20 years in Army logistics," I said. Preparation was my job." Marcus continued making notes. Nadine studied my face. "The report we received claimed you were showing signs of paranoia, obsessing over financial details, questioning routine purchases. I've questioned 3 specific charges," I said. "A restaurant dinner that occurred when I was at a VA appointment 30 miles away. A hotel stay when I was visiting a friend in Raleigh. Concert tickets for an event my wife told me was canceled. Those aren't routine purchases. They're evidence." "Evidence of what?" Nadine asked. "Adultery funded with marital assets," I said, "and a coordinated plan to gain legal control of accounts I've deliberately kept outside my wife's access." I watched Nadine Weaver and Marcus Finley read that certificate with professional attention to detail. They'd arrived expecting to find an unstable elderly man needing intervention. Instead, they found someone who'd outplanned the people trying to trap him. The hunters had become documentation. Nadine and Marcus had begun asking standard wellness questions when the power dynamic I'd built was about to be tested. We were 20 minutes into the assessment when I heard Corinne's car in the driveway. 14:30 hours. Precise timing. Not early, not late. Exactly calibrated to arrive midway through the social worker's visit. I was answering Nadine's question about my daily routine when the front door opened. Corinne walked into the living room, saw Nadine and Marcus, saw their badges. Her expression shifted through surprise to concern in 2 seconds. But I'd been watching people fake emotions for 2 weeks. That surprise wasn't real. She'd known they'd be here. She'd been waiting for this exact moment. "Oh," she said, her voice already trembling. Is everything all right? Nadine stood. Mrs. Garrett, I'm Nadine Weaver with Adult Protective Services. We're conducting a wellness assessment. Would you like to join us? Of course. Corinne sat across from me, her hands shaking. I've been so worried. Thank you for coming. The performance had begun. Nadine resumed her seat. Mrs. Garrett, can you tell us about your concerns? Corinne took a slow breath. When she spoke, her voice was soft, anxious, the voice of someone carrying a terrible burden alone. He's been obsessed with money, she said, going through every statement, questioning purchases I've made for years. Last week he interrogated me about a restaurant charge in front of my church friends. It was humiliating. Marcus made notes. He accuses me of terrible things, Corinne continued, tears forming now. Says I'm hiding expenses, lying about where I've been. He's paranoid, suspicious. It frightens me. She looked at Nadine with perfect vulnerability. I don't know what to do. I love him, but I'm scared. His behavior has changed so much. The PTSD from his military service, I think it's finally catching up to him. She wasn't surprised to find them here. She'd been waiting for this exact moment. Nadine listened without expression. Marcus took notes. Neither interrupted. Neither offered sympathy. Just professional observation. Corinne talked for 10 minutes. Described my supposed obsessive behavior, my aggressive questioning, my withdrawal from engagement, my refusal to seek help despite her suggestions. Every word calculated. Every phrase using wellness terminology. Every gesture reinforcing the image of a frightened spouse trying to help a husband who couldn't see his own decline. It was her best performance. Better than day one. Better than the church friend's visit. She'd practiced for these exact witnesses. When she finished, Nadine set down her tablet. Mr. Garrett, she said, do you have anything to say in response to these concerns? Before I tell you what happened when I answered that question, are you still with me? Comment. A, if you think I should show them my documentation now, or B, if I should wait and tell me why in one sentence. Quick note. What follows includes some recreated details for storytelling impact. The lesson is what matters. I stood, walked to the annex, retrieved my log, returned, set it on the coffee table in front of Nadine and Marcus. Yes, I said, I have documentation. Everything she's describing I've been recording with timestamps and evidence. I handed Nadine the psychiatric certificate from my breast pocket. This is dated 8 days ago. Professional evaluation. 2 hours of testing. Conclusion, no cognitive decline, no clinical disorders, no PTSD, complete mental competence. Nadine read it, handed it to Marcus. I opened the log to the first page. Day 1, November 6th, 0630 hours. I asked my wife when our grandson's baptism would be. She replied yesterday. The ceremony had happened without me. She'd known for 6 weeks and deliberately excluded me. I turned pages. Day 2. She proposes wellness evaluation using institutional terminology no civilian spouse would naturally use. Risk assessment. Vulnerable adult protocol. Someone trained her. I showed them bank statements. 3 payments totaling $2,400 to Mercer Strategic Consulting LLC, a company registered by Leland Mercer 6 weeks ago. The man standing beside my wife at the baptism I wasn't invited to. The consulting fees are funding my wife's affair. Corinne's face went pale. Day 7. She stages visit from church friends. I ask one question about a restaurant charge. She doesn't answer me. Instead, tells her friends I'm obsessively questioning everything. Turns reasonable inquiry into symptom before witnesses. Day 13. She presents medical assessment signed by Dr. Raymond Stiles. I've never met Dr. Stiles. He diagnosed me without examination based solely on her testimony. Federal medical ethics violation. I close the log. Everything she said today is documented, with dates, times, exact quotes, cross-referenced with evidence. My attorney has reviewed all of it. Nadine and Marcus read the log in complete silence. 15 minutes. They turned pages methodically, read entries, examined the timeline, cross-referenced the certificate. Corinne sat frozen. She couldn't leave without looking guilty. Couldn't speak without contradicting documentation. Could only watch as 2 federal social workers read 14 days of evidence proving every word she'd said was systematic gaslighting. Everything she said today was recorded by 2 federal agents, just not the way she'd planned. Finally, Nadine closed the log, handed it back with the certificate. Mr. Garrett, this is extremely thorough documentation. She looked at Corinne, then back at me. We'll file our complete report within 48 hours. Based on what we've seen today, I don't anticipate recommending any intervention. She and Marcus stood, gathered their materials. I walked them to the door. Thank you for your cooperation, Nadine said, and for your military service. They left. Corinne watched from the window, her performance face frozen. She turned to look at me. I didn't say anything, just picked up my log and walked back to the annex. Nadine and Marcus left with professional courtesy, promising their report within 48 hours. Corinne watched them from the window, believing her performance had worked. She didn't know they'd spent the last 15 minutes reading documentation that turned every word she'd said into evidence of systematic gaslighting. After the social workers left, Corinne stayed in the living room for 20 minutes without speaking. I didn't say anything either. Just documented the wellness check in my log while she sat in silence, probably calculating her next move. I'd spent 15 days documenting everything in silence. On the 16th morning, I finally told someone the whole story. Day 15, 1,000 hours. Common Grounds Coffee House. Winifred, Bernard, and Ulysses sat at our usual corner table when I arrived. I'd asked them to meet me, said I needed to talk. They'd come without questions. I ordered a round of coffee, sat down, looked at 3 people who'd watched me maintain the same routines for years, without seeing anything that matched what Corinne was claiming. Then I told them everything. Started with November 6th, the baptism that happened yesterday. Corinne's one-word answer that revealed 6 weeks of deliberate planning. The silver-haired man in the family photo, standing where a husband should stand. Told them about the wellness language, the scripted phrases, the hidden authorization clauses, the doctor who'd signed an assessment without examining me, the consulting fees flowing to Leland Mercer's LLC. Told them about the community campaign, the PTSD narrative, the church council meeting, the manufactured witnesses, the staged performances before official observers. Told them about the psychiatric certification I'd obtained proactively, the 14-day log, the wellness check where I'd presented documentation that turned Corinne's testimony into evidence of systematic gaslighting. Took me 20 minutes, uninterrupted. Military precision in the telling, but I could feel my voice tightening on certain details. The baptism exclusion, my son's program phrases, the veterans they'd tried to recruit as false witnesses. When I finished, I looked at each of them. I need witnesses who can testify I'm stable, I said, that this narrative is fabricated, that I've been the same person you've known for years. Are you willing? Winifred nodded immediately. No hesitation. Of course. Bernard and Ulysses exchanged a glance. Then Ulysses looked at me with an expression I recognized from 20 years of military service. The look a superior officer gives when a soldier asks a question with an obvious answer. Why are you asking that question? He said. Not angry, but with an edge of offense. You shouldn't be asking us. I blinked. I need to know you'll testify. You're asking if we'll show up, Bernard said flatly. That's what you shouldn't be asking, because when the time comes, we show up. That's what we do. 20 years out of uniform, and they still spoke the same language, unconditional loyalty to a brother under fire. Something broke in my chest. 15 days of controlled discipline. 15 days of military precision documentation. 15 days of showing no emotion, maintaining tactical distance, treating my own life like an operational problem to solve. And here were 3 people who didn't need evidence or explanations or proof. They'd watched me for years. They knew who I was. And when I asked if they'd stand beside me, they'd taken offense at the question itself, because the answer was so obvious it insulted them to ask. Thank you, I said. My voice was rougher than I'd intended. Don't thank us, Ulysses said. Just tell us when and where. I left that coffee shop with 3 committed witnesses, and the first real hope I'd felt since this started. The next morning, day 16, Quentin's email arrived at 0900 hours. Subject line evidence submitted by opposing party. Video attachment. I opened it. A 3-minute edited clip showed me during what looked like a heated argument, my face angry, voice raised, gestures aggressive, no context provided, no explanation of what the argument was about or when it happened. Just 3 minutes of footage designed to make me look volatile, unstable. Exactly the narrative Corinne had been building. I watched it twice. Recognized the argument. August. The day I'd discovered the first adultery evidence in the bank statements. I'd confronted Corinne. She'd denied everything. I'd shown her the proof. She'd deflected, accused me of paranoia, turned the conversation into an attack on my obsessive behavior. I'd been angry, justifiably angry, but she'd filmed it without my knowledge, edited out all context, turned justified confrontation into evidence of mental instability. I drove to Quentin's office immediately. He had the video already loaded on his computer when I arrived. "When was this argument?" he asked. "Do you remember?" "August 12th, I said. I confronted her about restaurant charges that appeared when I had alibis. She deflected. I got angry. I didn't know she was filming." Quentin made notes. "Do you have documentation from that day?" I pulled out my phone, opened my calendar app, scrolled back to August. August 12th. Dental cleaning appointment. Dr. Morrison's office. 2 to 3:30 in the afternoon. I have the receipt. I pulled up the scanned receipt I'd saved. Routine 6-month cleaning. Appointment time 1400 to 1530 hours. 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Quentin looked at the video file properties, clicked through metadata. "The video timestamp says August 12th at 2:47 p.m., he said slowly. "You were in a dentist chair. This is fabricated evidence." The video said 2:47 p.m. My receipt said 2 to 3:30 p.m. at Dr. Morrison's office. One of them was lying. "She either filmed this on a different day and changed the timestamp," Quentin said, "or she spliced footage from multiple occasions and manipulated the metadata to make it look like a single event on a specific date. Either way, we can prove it's false." He made more notes. "I'm bringing in a digital forensics expert," he said. "Someone who can analyze the file structure, examine the metadata, testify to manipulation if this goes to court. We need technical proof, not just your alibi." "How long will that take?" 2 days. Maybe 3. Quentin looked at me. "This is good for us. She's submitting evidence we can definitively disprove. Every piece of fabricated documentation makes our case stronger." I sat in Quentin's office staring at 2 pieces of evidence. Corinne's video showing me at 2:47 p.m. on August 12th, and my dental receipt showing I was in a chair 3 miles away at that exact moment. She hadn't just edited the video. She'd fabricated timeline evidence we could prove was impossible. Quentin scheduled the forensics analysis for that afternoon. The impossible timeline wasn't just a contradiction. It was proof of deliberate fabrication we could demonstrate in court. Day 16. 1400 hours. Quentin's office. Ethan Prescott, 34, opened his laptop with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd testified in digital fraud cases more times than he could count. He'd arrived exactly on time, carried his equipment, in a professional case, introduced himself with a firm handshake and credentials that included forensic certifications from 3 different professional organizations. "Let's see what we have," he said. Quentin loaded the video file onto Ethan's system. The same 3-minute clip Corinne had submitted showing me angry aggressive, supposedly unstable. Ethan worked in silence for 20 minutes. Clicked through layers of file data I didn't understand. Opened programs with names like ExifTool and Media Info and Audacity. Made notes on a pad beside his laptop. Finally, he looked up. "The metadata tells the real story," he said. "This file was edited November 9th, 3 days after the baptism. The original EXIF data shows filming on August 12th, but the displayed timestamp was manually altered." "How certain are you about the splicing?" I asked. Ethan turned his laptop so Quentin and I could see the screen. Pulled up what looked like a graph with colored bars and peaks. "Look at this brightness histogram," he said. "See the discontinuity at frame 42. That's where 2 separate video clips were joined. Different lighting environments, different days. The brightness values don't match because they were filmed under different conditions." He clicked to another window. Audio waveform. Visual representation of sound patterns. "Here," he pointed. "Audio gap at timestamp 115. Natural conversation doesn't have gaps like this. This is where dialogue was removed during editing. Someone cut out context that didn't fit their narrative." Quentin made notes. "Can you testify to this in court?" "Absolutely," Ethan said. "I've testified in 47 digital fraud cases. This is among the clearest fabrications I've analyzed. The editing wasn't sophisticated enough to hide the technical markers. Whoever did this understood basic video editing, but didn't know how to mask metadata manipulation. He generated a report while we watched. Technical analysis with screenshots of the brightness, discontinuity, metadata. Timestamps showing edit dates, audio waveform gaps marked with precise time codes." "This wasn't just edited," Ethan said, handing the printed report to Quentin. "This was staged. Someone filmed multiple occasions, spliced them together, removed dialogue, and altered timestamps to create false evidence. I can testify to that." Quentin added the forensics report to my file. The same file that now contained 14 days of handwritten logs, psychiatric certification, bank statement, evidence, witness commitments, and Adult Protective Services documentation. She submitted fabricated evidence to official proceedings, Quentin said. That's not just fraud. That's perjury if she certifies it under oath. I felt cold satisfaction, not just timeline contradiction, technical proof. Digital evidence that couldn't be explained away with tears or performance or gaslighting. That evening I texted my son. Brief message, neutral tone. Need to show you something. Can we meet tomorrow morning? Amelie's French Bakery 900. Stellan responded 3 hours later. Okay. Day 17. 0900 hours. Amelie's French Bakery on East Boulevard. I arrived first. Ordered coffee. Sat at a table by the window. Waited. Stellan walked in at 0903. Saw me. Hesitated. Then came to the table and sat down. We didn't make small talk. I slid the forensics printout across the table. 8 pages. Color-coded diagrams. Technical analysis. Professional letterhead. I'm not asking you to choose sides, I said quietly. I'm asking you to look at the evidence. Stellan picked up the printout, started reading. I waited. 3 minutes of complete silence. The only sounds were the espresso machine behind the counter. Conversations at other tables, the rustle of pages, as Stellan read through Ethan's analysis. His fingers traced the brightness histogram on page 3, stopped at the splice point diagram, moved to the metadata timeline on page 5, showing edit dates 3 days after filming. Finally, he looked up. Where did you get this? He asked. Your mother submitted the video as evidence, I said. My attorney had it analyzed by a digital forensics expert. Those are the findings. Stellan looked back at the printout. His expression had shifted. Not to belief, not to my side, but to uncertainty. The absolute certainty that had been in his eyes since this started was cracking. Why would she edit it? He asked, careful, cautious, like he was testing whether the question itself was allowed. That's the question I've been asking for 16 days, I said. He read through the report again, slower this time, paying attention to details. The technical language about metadata manipulation, the brightness discontinuity measurements, the audio gap analysis. I need time to think about this, he said finally. He didn't defend Corinne, didn't say I was lying, didn't accuse me of fabricating the forensics report, didn't dismiss the evidence as misunderstanding or technical error, just said he needed time. He folded the printout. I thought he'd leave it on the table, thought he'd walk away and pretend this conversation never happened. But he put it in his jacket pocket, took it with him. I should go, he said. I nodded. Thanks for meeting me. He left without another word. I watched him walk to his car, get in, sit there for 2 minutes before starting the engine. Stellan didn't choose my side. He didn't apologize. He didn't even say he believed me. But when he folded that forensics printout and put it in his jacket pocket, instead of leaving it on the table, I knew something had shifted. My son had spent 16 days certain his mother was telling the truth. Now he was asking why she'd need to edit a video at all. I didn't hear from Stellan after he left the bakery. Didn't expect to. He was processing evidence that contradicted everything his mother had told him for 16 days. That kind of realization took time. Quentin's investigator sent the email chain at 6:43 on the morning of day 18. My phone rang while I was making coffee. Quentin, urgent tone. Get to my office, he said. The investigator pulled Corinne's emails. You need to see this. I was there by 7:30. Quentin had the email chain printed and organized chronologically on his desk. 23 messages spanning November 2nd through November 16th, all between Corinne and Leland. The investigator pulled these from Corinne's email account through legitimate subpoena, Quentin said. Read the one from November 14th. I picked up the page from Leland Mercer to Corinne Garrett. Date November 14th, 2025. 9:47 p.m. Subject timeline. Corinne, complete the guardianship before the hearing. If he wins, our plan to access the property falls apart. You need to push harder on the incapacity angle. The wellness check should have worked. What happened? Dr. Stiles is asking questions about the preliminary assessment. I told him to stay quiet, but he's nervous. We may need to cut him loose if this escalates. The consulting payments stop after this month, regardless of outcome. I can't keep that paper trail active if we're heading to court. I read it twice, then looked at Quentin. He's not helping her, I said. He's invested in the outcome. Keep reading, Quentin said. I went through the chain chronologically. November 2nd, Leland asking about my daily schedule when I'd be away from the house. November 5th, discussion of which church friends would be most sympathetic to wellness concerns. November 8th, coordinating the timing of Stellan's scripted visit. November 12th, planning the social worker visit, discussing optimal timing for maximum impact. Every step documented, every manipulation planned, every witness cultivated through deliberate strategy. Email chains don't lie. November 14th, 9:47 p.m. Complete the guardianship before the hearing. Not support her, not help your girlfriend. Complete it. Our plan, the property, my Bitcoin accounts, the assets I deliberately kept outside Corinne's access. The entire conspiracy reduced to 2 words in an email sent at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. This is direct evidence of conspiracy, Quentin said. Leland Mercer isn't a concerned boyfriend helping a troubled woman with a difficult husband. He's a co-conspirator with financial motive to gain guardianship control over your accounts. He added the email chain to my file. We have everything now, he said, but we need to organize it. The hearing is day 21, 3 days away. We need a presentation that shows the systematic nature of this fraud. How long will that take? All night, Quentin said. Are you available? I nodded. We worked from 1,400 hours on day 18 straight through to 300 hours on day 19. Quentin ordered dinner delivered to the office. Chinese food we ate at our desks while organizing 18 days of documentation into a coherent case file. We're not building a defense, Quentin said around 1,800 hours. We're building a counteroffensive with 8 independent lines of evidence. He laid out 8 manila folders on the conference table. Folder 1, my handwritten log, 18 days, 44 pages. Every interaction time-stamped and quoted, cross-referenced with supporting documentation. Folder 2, psychiatric certification from Dr. Reeves, dated day 12. Professional evaluation, 2 hours of testing, clear finding of complete mental competence, notarized, dated 10 days before the wellness check. Folder 3, digital forensics report from Ethan Prescott, video metadata analysis, brightness histogram showing splice points, audio waveform gaps, technical proof of fabricated evidence with expert testimony attached. Folder 4, email chain between Corinne and Leland, 23 messages, clear conspiracy, direct financial motive, coordination of witnesses and timing, complete the guardianship before the hearing. Folder 5, financial records, bank statements showing the consulting fee payments, LLC registration from Mercer, strategic consulting dated October 2024, business records showing Leland as principal, cross-reference timeline showing payments began 2 weeks after LLC creation. Folder 6, Winifred Irwin's written testimony, 7 years of observation, statement about church council PTSD narrative, documentation of Stellan's scripted phrase exposure, independent witness challenging Corinne's community campaign. Folder 7, veteran witness statements, Bernard Cobb and Ulysses Hampton, military service records, decades of observation, Philip Radcliffe's report of stranger soliciting false testimony, evidence of manufactured witness campaign. Folder 8, adult protective services documentation, Nadine Weaver and Marcus Finley's official report, dated day 16, finding no intervention recommended. Subject demonstrated exceptional preparation and clear mental competence. Concerns raised by reporting party not substantiated by evidence. The log shows pattern, I said. The forensics prove fabrication. The emails expose motive. Every layer stands alone. But together, Quentin said, they create a picture no judge can ignore. When she sees this, she won't see a family dispute. She'll see coordinated fraud. 8 manila folders arranged in grid formation on Quentin's conference table, each labeled, each indexed, each independently proving one aspect of the fraud. By 0300 hours, we had the complete package assembled. Executive summary, timeline, evidence index, witness list, expert testimony, financial documentation, digital forensics, official clearances. Quentin made copies of everything, organized it into presentation binders, prepared exhibits for court submission. I looked at the 8 files organized on Quentin's conference table at 3:17 in the morning of day 19. Daily log, psychiatric certification, video forensics, email conspiracy, financial records, witness testimonies, social services clearance, Each file represented a day I chose tactical discipline instead of emotional reaction. 48 hours after assembling the 8-layer case file with Quentin at 3 in the morning, I sat in courtroom 4C of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. Day 21, 9:07 a.m. The hearing that would determine whether I retained my legal identity or became property. The panel convened with 3 members. Judge Eleanor Whitmore presided, 62 years old, silver hair pulled into a precise knot. 31 years on the bench, specializing in guardianship proceedings. Her introduction to the docket carried no warmth. Matter of Corinne Palmer seeking emergency guardianship over Desmond Palmer, case number GC-2025-4782. She reviewed the petition summary without looking at me once. Victoria Caldwell stood to present the opening statement. 49 years old, Corinne's attorney wore a navy suit with pearl earrings that caught the fluorescent courtroom lighting. She specialized in guardianship law. Her firm's website listed 14 successful petitions in 18 months. Her voice carried practiced sympathy as she addressed the panel. Your Honors, this is a case about a devoted wife seeking to protect her husband from the invisible wounds of war that he cannot acknowledge himself. I sat beside Quentin at the respondent table. Corinne occupied the petitioner table 15 feet to my left. Hands folded, expression composed. She'd chosen a burgundy cardigan over a cream blouse. The outfit projected concerned caregiver, not conspirator, planning property theft with her lover. Leland Mercer sat in the gallery's 3rd row, far enough back to appear coincidental. My son Stellan sat beside his mother, 24 years old, and refusing to make eye contact with me across the courtroom aisle. The entry twist arrived when Victoria Caldwell presented her evidence timeline. I'd expected her to emphasize the baptism exclusion or the church rumors. Instead, she led with the Bitcoin key comment. On October 19th, the respondent made an unprompted statement to his adult son about cryptocurrency access codes demonstrating the paranoid ideation characteristic of his deteriorating condition. She'd reframed my single honest moment with Stellan as the primary symptom. The wellness check became secondary evidence. The video became confirmation rather than foundation. Quentin had warned me about this inversion strategy. They'll take your strongest moment of clarity and present it as your weakest moment of illness. He'd been exactly right. Victoria called Corinne to testify at 9:15. My wife approached the witness stand with measured steps. She placed her left hand on the Bible, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth with a voice that trembled just enough to suggest emotional strain without breaking composure. The panel clerk asked her to state her full name for the record. Corinne Elizabeth Palmer, she said, married to Desmond for 26 years. Victoria guided her through the chronology with surgical precision. The baptism exclusion became a family moment when I noticed Desmond seemed confused about why we were gathering. The wellness keywords became concerning phrases he'd started using: tactical assessment, operational security, military language that felt disconnected from our peaceful retirement. The video documentation became my attempt to capture what I was seeing so doctors could understand the severity. Corinne's voice trembled at scripted moments. When Victoria asked about the hardest part of seeking guardianship, tears appeared perfectly timed. Knowing that he'll think I betrayed him, but I love my husband more than I need his approval. If protecting Desmond means he hates me, I'll carry that burden. I watched Stellan's expression as his mother spoke. He sat motionless in the gallery, absorbing her performance with the concentration of someone trying to reconcile conflicting data sets. The video metadata revelation had planted doubt. Now he was measuring her testimony against the timestamp evidence. The 15-year-old version of Stellan used to watch me the same way during field training exercises at Fort Bragg. I'd bring him to Family Day demonstrations, and he'd study every movement, how I cleared rooms, how I communicated with hand signals, how I maintained situational awareness under simulated stress. He'd ask questions afterward. Why did you check that corner twice? What made you change the entry angle? He wanted to understand the system behind the decisions. That's what he was doing now, trying to decode which parent was running the operation and which parent was the target. Victoria presented the psychiatric evaluation at 9:32. Dr. Aaron Castellanos conducted a comprehensive assessment and determined that Mr. Palmer meets the criteria for guardianship under North Carolina General Statute 35A-1101. The evaluation identifies paranoid ideation, social withdrawal, and resistance to appropriate care. Corinne nodded as Victoria read the findings. Her expression projected reluctant acceptance. The wife who'd hoped the professional assessment would contradict her fears, but had been forced to confront the medical reality. She'd practiced this reaction. I'd seen her rehearse emotional responses in the bathroom mirror, before church events, calibrating her expression to match the required narrative. Judge Whitmore asked the question that created the exit twist. Mrs. Palmer, has your husband ever been violent or threatening toward you? Corinne paused. The silence extended for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to suggest she was weighing a difficult truth, short enough to avoid seeming rehearsed. Not physically, but there's a controlled anger in how he documents everything now. Every conversation logged, every interaction recorded. It feels like living with someone who sees me as an adversary rather than his partner. She'd just reframed my tactical evidence gathering as proof of the paranoia they were alleging. The daily log became a symptom instead of a defense. The controlled anger I'd maintained for 21 days became evidence of the mental deterioration justifying guardianship. She'd inverted my strongest asset into their most compelling argument. Quentin made a note on his legal pad. She's good. Victoria concluded her direct examination at 9:43. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Whitmore looked at Quentin. Does the respondent wish to cross-examine? We do, Your Honor, Quentin said. But first, we'd like to acknowledge that Mrs. Palmer's testimony was delivered with remarkable precision. Corinne stepped down from the witness stand at 9:46. She'd performed flawlessly, voice trembling at scripted moments, tears perfectly timed every gesture, reinforcing the devoted wife protecting damaged veteran narrative. I had to admit, if I didn't have proof, she would have won. 2 minutes after Corinne's flawless performance, Quentin stood and placed a small recording device on the table in front of Judge Whitmore. 9:48 a.m. Your Honor, we'd like to present Exhibit 14 audio documentation obtained through legitimate investigation on November 17th. Victoria Caldwell rose immediately. Objection, we haven't been provided discovery on... The investigation concluded 72 hours ago, Quentin said. We filed notice within the required window. The court received our exhibit list yesterday afternoon. Judge Whitmore reviewed her docket file. The objection is overruled. Proceed. Quentin pressed play. Leland Mercer's voice filled the courtroom, first smooth, practiced carrying the careful modulation of someone who'd coached witnesses before. Now say the line about protecting him. Remember to let your voice break on protecting. Cry at this point. Corinne's voice came next, laughing. The sound carried none of the trembling vulnerability she'd performed on the witness stand 15 minutes earlier. Like this, I only wanted to protect him. Perfect, Leland said on the recording. Exactly like that. Just don't laugh during the actual testimony. Silence, complete silence. The kind of courtroom quiet that follows bombshell evidence, when everyone in the room simultaneously processes the gap between performance and reality. I watched Corinne's face drain of color. Her hands, which had been folded with composed grace on the petitioner table, now gripped the edge until her knuckles showed white against burgundy cardigan sleeves. The recording continued. Leland's voice. When Victoria asks about the hardest part, that's your moment for tears. Real tears, if you can manage it. If not, touch your eyes first. The moisture helps. Corinne's voice still laughing. You've done this before. I've consulted on 14 guardianship cases, Leland said. Presentation matters as much as evidence. The panel needs to see devoted wife protecting damaged veteran. Every word, every gesture reinforces that narrative. Quentin stopped the playback. This recording was made November 17th at Mrs. Garrett's residence between 2 and 3 p.m. My investigator obtained it through legitimate surveillance after discovering the email conspiracy referenced in Exhibit 9. The full recording runs 47 minutes and covers the complete testimony rehearsal. Judge Whitmore looked directly at Corinne. Mrs. Garrett, do you dispute the authenticity of this recording? Victoria started to answer. Your Honor, we need time to verify. The question was for your client, Judge Whitmore said. Corinne opened her mouth. No sound emerged. I watched her attempt the same composure she'd maintained through her entire testimony performance, but the recording had shattered the foundation. She'd built her credibility on spontaneous, emotional authenticity. The evidence proved every trembling word had been scripted. Stellum stood from his gallery seat. He didn't speak, just stood there staring at his mother with the expression of someone watching a familiar structure collapse. The video metadata revelation had planted doubt. The rehearsal recording confirmed the conspiracy. Leland's voice on the recording cry at this point, Corinne's voice laughing, "I only wanted to protect him." Leland, "Perfect, don't laugh during actual testimony." Silence, complete, absolute. Every person in that courtroom heard the 24-year marriage dissolve into a 47-minute fraud rehearsal. Judge Whitmore addressed the panel. "We'll take a 2-hour recess. Reconvene at noon for respondents' full counter-presentation. Mrs. Garrett, you remain under oath. Mr. Thornton, prepare your exhibits." The gavel struck at 9:53. I gathered my documentation folder and followed Quentin into the courthouse hallway. The marble floors amplified every footstep, lawyers conferring with clients, court staff moving between chambers, families waiting for afternoon dockets. We found a quiet alcove near the south stairwell where the noise level dropped enough for private conversation. Quentin set his briefcase on the window ledge. The recording destroyed her credibility, but I need to understand the actual target. What exactly would financial guardianship give them access to? What can they do with the Bitcoin key? I'd been waiting for this question since the email revelation. I never put Corinne's name on the digital wallet accounts. Not one. She has zero legal access to cryptocurrency assets. Then why go through this entire conspiracy? Quentin asked. If she can't access the accounts anyway. Financial guardianship grants court-ordered power, I said. The panel can order me to disclose all assets and transfer control for my own protection. That's the statute language, asset protection. If Corinne wins guardianship, she gains legal authority to force me to reveal the private keys and transfer the Bitcoin to accounts she controls. Quentin made the connection immediately. So they don't want the money directly. They want the court to give them the legal mechanism to make you hand it over. Exactly, I said. I told Stellan about the Bitcoin key on October 19th because I wanted him to know it existed if something happened to me. Legitimate estate planning. Corinne took that single conversation and built it into the foundation of her paranoid ideation argument. The wellness check, the psychiatric evaluation, the coached testimony, every piece designed to convince the panel I'm mentally incompetent to manage my own assets. The hallway clock showed 11:42, 18 minutes until the afternoon session. Quentin reviewed his exhibit list. We have the daily log showing tactical clarity, psychiatric certification proving you don't meet guardianship criteria, video forensics exposing timestamp fabrication, email chain revealing financial conspiracy, the rehearsal recording destroying testimony credibility, Winifred and the veterans validating your competence. That's 7 independent evidence layers. 8, I said. Social services cleared me after the wellness check. APS found no cause for intervention. Right, 8 layers. Quentin closed his briefcase. The question is whether the panel weighs evidence or marriage duration. Bitcoin wallets require private keys. I control the keys. Corinne's name appears on 0 accounts. Financial guardianship equals court order forcing disclosure. That's the target. Not the money itself, the legal power to make me give it up. We returned to courtroom 4C at 11:58. Corinne sat at the petitioner table with Victoria, her burgundy cardigan, replaced by a gray blazer, attempting to project professional composure after the rehearsal recording exposure. Leland had moved from the 3rd row to the back of the gallery, increasing distance from the conspiracy he'd been caught coaching on audio. Stellum sat alone now, not beside his mother, not beside me. The middle of the gallery's 2nd row, equidistant from both parents, processing the evidence with the same analytical focus he'd brought to my field training demonstrations 15 years ago. Judge Whitmore convened the afternoon session at noon exactly. Quentin had asked what they'd actually gained from guardianship, and I'd explained the mechanism. Digital assets I deliberately kept outside her legal access. Court-ordered disclosure, powers forced transfer under asset protection pretense. They didn't want my money. They wanted the legal authority to make me hand over the keys. The afternoon session would determine whether the panel believed 18 days of evidence or 24 years of marriage. The panel recessed at noon to deliberate. 18 days of evidence versus 24 years of marriage. Judge Whitmore and the 2 co-panelists had carried the files into chambers to review the 8 layers of documentation Quentin had assembled. I stood in the 3rd-floor courthouse hallway near the water fountain, watching lawyers and families move between courtrooms when my son found me alone. Stellan approached without his mother, without Victoria Caldwell, just my 24-year-old son walking down the marble corridor with his hands in his jacket pockets, in an expression I recognized from the day I'd taught him to apologize after he'd broken his sister's science project in 6th grade. He knew he'd done something wrong. He didn't know how to fix it. He sat on the wooden bench beside me, didn't speak. 2 minutes of silence stretched between us while courthouse staff moved past clerks, carrying docket files, attorneys conferring in low voices, a maintenance worker replacing fluorescent bulbs in the overhead fixtures. The smell of floor polish mixed with the faint coffee scent from the vending alcove down the hall. Finally, Stellan spoke. His voice carried none of the rehearsed certainty I'd heard during the wellness check video. Mom told me to say that, about the threatening behavior on August 12th. I don't know everything that happened. I could have said, I know. I could have explained the email conspiracy, the rehearsal recording, the financial guardianship mechanism designed to force Bitcoin disclosure. Instead, I placed my hand on his shoulder and said nothing. Military discipline teaches you when to hold fire, when the tactical advantage comes from silence instead of engagement. My son had just broken from the conspiracy that had consumed 21 days of my life. He didn't need explanations or evidence presentations. He needed to know his father could forgive without requiring confession details. I should have asked more questions, Stellan said. You're asking them now, I said. He nodded. We sat on that wooden bench for another 3 minutes, while the courthouse clock above the stairwell ticked toward 12:15. When he stood to leave, he looked at me with the same analytical focus he'd brought to my field training demonstrations 15 years earlier, trying to understand the system behind the decisions. The metadata on the video, he said. When you mentioned the timestamp during the wellness check, I thought you were confused, but you were testing to see if I'd already watched it. You're good at pattern recognition, I said. You always have been. He walked back down the corridor toward the elevator, not toward his mother's side of the courthouse, not toward my defense table, just toward the exit, processing the gap between the narrative he'd been sold and the evidence he'd witnessed in court. 2 minutes of silence in a courthouse hallway, father and son sitting on a wooden bench. No explanations, no accusations, just my hand on his shoulder and his quiet admission that he'd been told what to say. Forgiveness doesn't always need words. The panel reconvened at 2:15 p.m. Everyone returned to their positions. Corinne and Victoria at the petitioner table, me and Quentin at respondent Leland, in the back gallery row, maintaining maximum distance from the rehearsal recording evidence. Stellan's seat in the second row remained empty. Judge Whitmore carried 3 folders as she returned to the bench. The co-panelists flanked her with identical expressions of professional neutrality. She placed the folders on her desk, adjusted her reading glasses, and addressed the courtroom without preamble. This panel has reviewed all submitted evidence in the matter of Corinne Palmer seeking emergency guardianship over Desmond Palmer, case number GC-2025-4782. We find insufficient grounds to grant the petition. Quentin's hand remained steady on his legal pad. No reaction. Professional discipline matching my own tactical control. But I felt the shift in courtroom pressure the moment when 18 days of evidence outweighed 24 years of marriage performance. Judge Whitmore continued, the psychiatric certification submitted by petitioner violated standard medical protocol. Dr. Aaron Castellanos attested to the respondent's mental incapacity without conducting a direct patient examination. This represents a serious breach of professional standards and calls into question the validity of the entire assessment. Corinne's face showed no emotion. She'd shifted from devoted wife performance mode to damage control neutrality. Video evidence presented as documentation of the respondent's deteriorating condition showed clear signs of fabrication upon forensic analysis. The metadata timestamps indicate the recording was created after the events it purports to document. Additionally, the rehearsal recording submitted by respondent's counsel demonstrates coordinated testimony coaching between petitioner and consultant Leland Mercer. Leland remained motionless in the back row. His smooth consultant confidence had evaporated somewhere between the audio playback and this verdict. Based on these findings, Judge Whitmore said this panel denies the petition for guardianship. Furthermore, we are referring this matter to the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation and the North Carolina Medical Board for review of potential fraud, falsification of medical documents, and testimony coaching violations. Panel decision: unanimous. Petition denied. Evidence insufficient. Medical protocol violated. Video fabricated. Testimony coached. Case referred for investigation. 21 words that ended the guardianship threat and started something larger. The gavel struck at 2:17 p.m. Quentin turned to me. "You won." "Legally," I said. "But the investigation means this isn't over." Corinne and Leland exited through separate courthouse doors, without speaking or making eye contact. Victoria Caldwell gathered her files, with the efficient movements of an attorney calculating billable hours for a lost case. The courtroom emptied within 4 minutes of the verdict. I remained at the respondent table while Quentin reviewed the dismissal paperwork Judge Whitmore's clerk had provided. The afternoon sunlight came through the tall windows at an angle that highlighted dust particles in the air, the same kind of tactical observation I'd trained myself to maintain during field operations. Notice everything. Process later. "The SBI referral changes the landscape," Quentin said. "Criminal investigation operates under different rules than civil guardianship proceedings." "I have 18 days of documented evidence," I said. "Daily log, email conspiracy, financial records, rehearsal recording. Everything they did is already proven." "For your defense," Quentin said. "But now the state decides whether to prosecute them." Judge Whitmore signed the dismissal order at 2:31 on the afternoon of day 21. I won my freedom and kept my Bitcoin keys outside Corinne's legal reach. But the panel's referral to investigating agencies meant the fight was shifting from civil court to criminal investigation, a battlefield where victory looked different. I had 18 days of documented evidence proving the conspiracy, and now the state would decide whether to prosecute. 3 days after the verdict that preserved my freedom and Bitcoin control, Quentin called with the first investigation update. The state had received the panel's referral and activated the machinery. Now, agencies I'd never contacted were deciding whether to prosecute the conspiracy I'd documented for 21 days. The medical board opened a formal investigation into Dr. Aaron Castellanos, Quentin said over the phone. His voice carried the measured tone of an attorney delivering procedural updates rather than battlefield victories. Signing a psychiatric incapacity certification without examining the patient violates fundamental protocol. They're reviewing whether to suspend his license pending full disciplinary proceedings. I sat at my kitchen table with the daily log I'd maintained throughout the guardianship fight. The handwritten entries ended on day 21 with a single line: verdict, denied petition, 2:31 p.m. The page after that remained blank. I'd stopped documenting when the immediate threat ended, but the consequences were still unfolding. Financial Crimes is auditing Leland's LLC, Quentin continued. They're treating the $2,400 monthly transfers from your joint account as potential embezzlement. The email chain about completing guardianship before the hearing gave them probable cause for fraud investigation. "What about Corinne?" I asked. "Fraud Division is reviewing her involvement. The rehearsal recording establishes coordination. Whether they file charges depends on how the evidence stacks: witness coaching, falsification of medical documents, conspiracy to commit financial fraud. The prosecutor assigned to the case is still building the file. I'd spent 18 days assembling evidence to defend my autonomy. Now that same documentation was feeding 3 parallel investigations targeting people I'd known for decades. Dr. Castellanos had evaluated me for 90 minutes and signed a certification that violated his professional obligations. Leland had coached my wife through testimony rehearsal while draining consulting fees from accounts I'd funded. Corinne had orchestrated the entire conspiracy to gain court-ordered power over assets I deliberately kept outside her legal reach. "How long before they decide?" I asked. "Months," Quentin said. "Medical board moves fastest, maybe 60 to 90 days for preliminary findings. Financial Crimes and Fraud Division typically run 4 to 6 months before filing charges. You'll be notified if they need additional testimony or evidence." I thanked him and ended the call at 11:43 a.m. on what would have been day 24 if I were still counting. 3 investigations: Medical Board protocol violation, Financial Crimes LLC audit, Fraud Division embezzlement review. I spent 21 days building evidence to protect myself. Now agencies I'd never contacted were using that evidence to prosecute people I'd lived with for decades. Stellan requested a meeting 1 week after the verdict. Not at my house. not at Corinne's residence, where he'd been staying since the baptism exclusion that started this entire sequence. He chose Common Ground's coffee house on 7th Street, neutral territory, where neither parent had tactical advantage. I arrived at 2 p.m. to find him already seated at a corner table near the window. He'd ordered black coffee the same way I took mine. Military preference passed from father to son through observation rather than instruction. The afternoon sunlight came through the glass at an angle that made him look younger than 24, closer to the teenager who'd watched my field training demonstrations with analytical focus. "I need to tell you something," he said when I sat down. No preamble. No small talk about weather or work. Just the direct communication style I'd taught him during those summer visits to Fort Bragg. "Go ahead," I said. "Mom told me you had hidden money. She said if you got guardianship, I'd inherit sooner when you—" He stopped, started again. I didn't know it was Bitcoin. I didn't know Leland was part of this. She made it sound like protecting family assets. I watched him process the gap between what he'd believed and what the evidence had proven. The rehearsal recording, the email conspiracy, the financial records showing consulting fees flowing to Leland's LLC rather than estate planning for Stellan's future. "The inheritance she promised would help me," he said quietly. "That was actually for Leland's benefit. I was the mouthpiece for her coach testimony and the bait to justify the whole scheme. She tricked me twice. The coffee shop sounds espresso machine, hissing customers, ordering at the counter, acoustic guitar music from overhead speakers, created ambient noise that insulated our conversation from nearby tables. I'd chosen situational awareness and tactical documentation for 21 days. Now I was sitting across from my son, watching him confront the reality that his mother had weaponized him for a conspiracy that would have stripped my legal autonomy. "You did nothing wrong by believing your mother," I said. "That's what sons are supposed to do." "But I should have—" "You asked questions when the evidence contradicted the narrative," I said. "The video timestamp, the rehearsal recording. You recognize the pattern breaks. That's all anyone can do when the people they trust are lying." He nodded. We sat in that coffee shop for another 20 minutes, while he explained the specific promises Corinne had made faster: inheritance, access, asset protection, family unity, preservation. Every promise had been designed to position him as justification for guardianship, while actually serving Leland's financial interests. My son sat across the table explaining how his mother used him as testimony weapon and inheritance lure simultaneously. I won the guardianship case. I kept my Bitcoin, but I was watching my family disintegrate in ways no verdict could repair. Stellan left Common Grounds at 2:37, 7 days after I won the hearing that preserved my freedom and assets. 3 agencies were investigating the conspiracy I documented with tactical discipline for 21 days. My son understood he'd been manipulated twice as coached mouthpiece and as false promise bait. I'd won the legal battle decisively, but I'd lost my family in ways no court could measure or repair. The investigations would take months to process, but the personal consequences were already counting down. The personal consequences didn't wait for investigation timelines. I signed the separation documents 2 weeks after the verdict at Quentin's office on a Tuesday morning that felt like routine paperwork rather than the formal dissolution of a 24-year marriage. Quentin reviewed each page before I added my signature. Legal separation agreement. Division of joint accounts. Everything split 50-50 except the digital assets, which remained under my sole control, per the guardianship panel's implicit validation that I possessed full mental capacity to manage them. The house would stay in my name. Corinne had already moved her belongings to an apartment near Leland's consulting office, completing the geographic separation that had started emotionally years earlier. "You have grounds for a civil suit?" Quentin said after I signed the final page. "Psychological damages. Fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The rehearsal recording and email conspiracy provide clear evidence. We could pursue significant financial recovery." I set down the pen. "No, the damages would be substantial," he said. 6 figures minimum, possibly more, depending on how we frame the Bitcoin guardianship attempt as economic coercion. "I don't want her money," I said. "I want to make sure the system can't let this happen to someone else. Fix the protocol that let Dr. Castellanos sign a certification without examining the patient. Make sure the medical board enforces oversight. That's the recovery that matters." Quentin studied me with the same analytical expression he'd maintained throughout the guardianship defense. You're choosing boundaries over revenge. I'm choosing to be done, I said. The entry twist arrived in that moment, the recognition that I could pursue maximum legal damages and financial punishment, but was selecting systemic reform instead. Not because Corinne deserved mercy, because extending the fight would require emotional investment. I no longer wanted to allocate to someone who'd orchestrated my legal incapacitation for Bitcoin access. Quentin filed the separation documents with the court that afternoon. The marriage would remain legally intact until the criminal investigations concluded. Prosecutors wanted to preserve all evidence chains, but the financial and residential boundaries were now formally established. 3 weeks after the verdict, Winifred invited herself to my house for dinner. She brought Bernard and Ulysses without asking permission, first arriving at 6:30 p.m. with a casserole dish that smelled like rosemary chicken, and the implicit expectation that I wouldn't turn away the people who'd testified on my behalf when my wife was trying to steal my autonomy. We ate at my dining room table, the same table where I'd assembled the 8-layer case file with Quentin during the night session on day 19. But tonight there were no legal documents, no evidence presentations, just 4 military veterans sharing a meal and conversation that had nothing to do with guardianship proceedings. The Hendersons are selling, Winifred said, passing the serving spoon to Bernard. After 32 years on Oakmont Avenue, they're moving to Florida. I didn't know that, I said. Posted the for sale sign last Thursday, she said. Beautiful property. Someone will buy it within a month. Bernard started a story about the supply sergeant in Kandahar who couldn't pronounce requisition. Called it requisition for 8 months straight. Every single requisition form, requisition request for ammunition, requisition request for MREs. We never corrected him. Ulysses laughed. Because it was too accurate. Half those requests did wreck our position when supply got the quantities wrong. They didn't mention the hearing, didn't ask about the investigations, didn't verify my mental competence or request proof that I was managing daily tasks without guardian supervision. Just talked about neighborhood news and military memories like I was part of the community again, rather than a defendant proving sanity. Winifred talking about Henderson's Florida move. Bernard laughing about supply sergeant mispronunciations. Ulysses asking about my deck stain recommendation. Normal, mundane, human. Nobody asking if I was competent or dangerous. They left at 8:45 p.m. after helping clear dishes and extracting a promise that I'd attend the next Saturday coffee gathering at the community center. The house felt quieter after they'd gone, but not empty. Just peacefully solitary in a way that felt like choice rather than isolation. 1 month after the verdict, I sat at my home office desk with the complete guardianship logbook. 44 pages of handwritten tactical documentation covering 21 days from baptism exclusion through verdict dismissal. Every threat recorded, every conversation logged, every piece of evidence tracked with disciplined precision. I opened to page 1, November 6th, 6:47 a.m. baptism exclusion notification received via Corinne's text message. The entry that had started the defensive documentation sequence I'd maintained for 3 weeks while my wife orchestrated a conspiracy to strip my legal autonomy and force Bitcoin disclosure through court-ordered guardianship. The logbook documented every day of the guardianship fight, but nowhere in those 44 pages had I documented the 24 years before when I'd chosen tactical distance over emotional presence often enough that Corinne stopped trying to reach me. I turned to the first blank page after the verdict entry and wrote a final notation. Day 42, first entry not documenting threat. She was truly lonely. I was too cold for too long. What she did was fraud. What Leland did was conspiracy. The rehearsal recording proved coordinated deception. The email chain proved financial motivation. The guardianship attempt was real, documented, and legally defeated. But I wasn't blameless in how we'd arrived at the morning of November 6th, when she decided excluding me from our grandson's baptism was acceptable. Justice doesn't erase the reality that I chose discipline over warmth. So many times she stopped expecting anything different. I opened the logbook to page 1, November 6th, 6:47 a.m. baptism exclusion notification. 44 pages documenting every threat. But nowhere did I document the 24 years before, when I chose tactical distance over emotional presence. I closed the logbook 1 month after winning the guardianship case that preserved my freedom and Bitcoin assets. Corinne's fraud was real. Leland's conspiracy was documented. but my emotional coldness had created the distance that made their plan possible. Justice addressed the legal wounds, it didn't make them disappear. The final accounting would come from the investigation agencies, not from my conscience. The investigations would proceed on their own timeline. Meanwhile, I walked my morning route at 600 hours 2 months after the verdict, and for the first time in months, I wasn't documenting anything. No logbook in my jacket pocket, no tactical notation of weather patterns or threat assessments. Just a 58-year-old man walking familiar Charlotte streets at dawn because walking had always been how I processed the world, not because I needed to prove competence to a guardianship panel. The divorce filing had been submitted 3 weeks earlier. Property division secured. Bitcoin assets legally confirmed under my sole control. The separation agreement established financial boundaries while criminal investigations proceeded. 3 agencies were still processing the evidence I'd assembled during 21 days of documentation. Medical Board reviewing, Dr. Castellanos for protocol violations, Financial Crimes auditing Leland's consulting company, Fraud Division examining the rehearsal recording and email conspiracy, but I'd stopped checking for updates, stopped monitoring investigation timelines, stopped treating every development like a battlefield briefing. The entry twist arrived in that psychological shift. The recognition that true freedom wasn't the legal verdict, but the moment I stopped needing to verify it daily. I'd won the guardianship case. The system was handling the prosecutorial machinery. My role had concluded. I walked past the community center where Winifred organized Saturday coffee gatherings, past the park where I'd met Stellan after the verdict, past the route I'd documented so carefully when every routine task became evidence of mental competence. Today it was just walking. The January morning air carried the cold clarity that follows winter rain. My breath formed visible clouds that dispersed within seconds. A delivery truck rumbled past on Providence Road. Normal, mundane, free. Stellan had called the previous afternoon with an invitation I hadn't expected. We're having a small gathering for the baby's first birthday tomorrow. 2 p.m. if you'd like to come. I arrived at his Myers Park house at 1:58. The same residence where Corinne had delivered the baptism exclusion notification 63 days earlier. The front door looked identical, but the context had transformed completely. Stellan opened the door before I knocked. I'm glad you could make it. Thank you for inviting me, I said. The gathering was genuinely small. Stellan, his wife, the baby, and 2 of her family members. No Corinne, no church friends performing wellness evaluations disguised as social concern. No Leland coaching responses from the periphery. I sat beside the cradle where my grandson, now 1-year-old, played with fabric blocks in primary colors. 63 days ago, I had been excluded from his baptism because my wife had decided I wasn't stable enough to attend family sacraments. Today I was invited to his first birthday celebration without ceremony or public apology. Presence itself closed the circle. 63 days earlier, excluded from grandson's baptism, wife petitioning for guardianship, son refusing eye contact. Today invited to first birthday, sitting beside cradle son saying, I'm glad you could make it. Full circle without speeches.
Look.
We sang happy birthday at 2:30, cut cake at 2:45. The baby smeared frosting across his high chair tray while adults took photographs and made the kind of small talk that fills family gatherings when dramatic chapters have concluded. Stellan walked me to the door at 3:20. I know we haven't talked about everything that happened, but I wanted you here. I know, I said. He didn't apologize again. I didn't need him to. The invitation was the apology. Attendance was the acceptance. I drove home through afternoon traffic and parked in my driveway. I sat in the car for 3 minutes before gathering my keys. My hands rested on the steering wheel. Steady, unwavering. The same hands that had documented 21 days of evidence proving I wasn't mentally incapacitated. The same hands that had signed separation papers. The same hands that held my grandson's fabric blocks this afternoon. I reviewed the journey from November 6th through today. Baptism exclusion. Wellness keywords planted. Psychiatric evaluations signed without examination. Video evidence fabricated. Testimony coached through 47-minute rehearsal sessions. 8 layers of counter-evidence assembled through tactical discipline. Corinne and Leland had fought for what they called the key Bitcoin access worth $280,000 that required guardianship power to force disclosure. They called it the key, like it was singular. Bitcoin key, asset key, control key. But the real key was never cryptocurrency access. It was the right to stand in your own life and say, "This is who I am," when someone tries to declare you incompetent. What they never understood was that the most important key isn't cryptocurrency or court-ordered financial control. It's autonomy, the right to decide who you are, the right to manage your own assets, attend your grandson's birthday walk, morning routes at 600 hours without documenting every step for defensive evidence. They wanted to strip that from me using psychiatric certifications and coach testimony and fabricated videos. They wanted legal power to declare me incapacitated so they could access assets I deliberately kept outside joint control. The exit twist crystallized in that final understanding. The conspiracy was never really about Bitcoin. It was about taking the fundamental right to self-determination from someone they'd decided was too damaged, too cold, too tactically distant to deserve autonomous control of his own existence. I'd won that right back through 21 days of disciplined documentation. But the real victory wasn't the verdict. It was sitting in this car 2 months later, reviewing the journey, and recognizing that I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I started the engine and pulled into my garage. The Bitcoin was secure. The divorce was proceeding. The investigations would conclude when they concluded. Stellan had invited me to his son's birthday. Winifred and the veterans treated me like community again instead of defendant. But the lesson wasn't about cryptocurrency or courtrooms or tactical evidence assembly. It was about autonomy. I've learned the simplest thing. Anyone who wants to control you will call you unstable until you bring the truth to light. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Don't make the mistake I made. I chose tactical discipline over emotional warmth for so many years that my wife stopped trying to reach me. I'm not excusing the guardianship conspiracy she orchestrated to access my Bitcoin. The fraud was real, the betrayal was documented, but I created the distance that made it possible. When you build walls to protect yourself, make sure you're not also isolating the people who still need connection. The lesson I learned isn't just about guardianship or Bitcoin or courtroom victories. It's about autonomy, the fundamental right to stand in your own life and say, "This is who I am," when someone tries to declare you incompetent. Anyone who wants to control you will call you unstable until you bring the truth to light. I believe God allowed me to go through those 21 days for a reason to prove that truth. When carefully preserved and presented, can defeat even the most orchestrated deception. Your autonomy is worth fighting for. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to document everything to protect yourself? If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that their autonomy matters. And if you're not subscribed, I'd be honored to have you join for more stories about truth and justice. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and attention mean everything to me. One final note, while this story includes fictionalized elements for storytelling and reflection, the core message about protecting your autonomy and bringing truth to light is universal to us. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next story.